In the late summer of 2005, I was a 10-year-old boy living in St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana, part of the sprawling New Orleans metropolitan area. Our home was a beautiful blue double shotgun house, where I lived with my mother, father, and younger sister, Angel. Life felt simple and familiar until August 26th, when whispers of a big storm started circulating. I overheard my mother on the phone with a friend, making plans to leave town, her voice tinged with worry as she discussed the approaching hurricane. But those plans never materialized. My father, stubborn and seasoned by years of weathering storms, decided we'd stay put. He'd ridden out countless hurricanes before, and to him, this one didn't seem any different. The storm had a name, Katrina, and it was about to change everything. That day, we prepared as best we could. We bought sandbags and wooden planks, spending hours boarding up the house. School was closed for the week, which thrilled me. I loved rain, and the idea of a storm meant days of watching cartoons and staying cozy indoors. Everyone around us downplayed the hurricane's threat, calling it just another storm. The radio, the neighbors, even the news seemed to shrug it off, predicting a best-case scenario. Looking back, I think that casual attitude convinced a lot of people to stay, people who tragically didn't make it through. I don't recall much of the daytime on August 29th, when Katrina made landfall. But the sound of the wind is burned into my memory. It wasn't a howl or a roar. It was like loud whispers, eerie and relentless, slamming against the planks we'd nailed over the windows. My whole family huddled together on my parents' bed, clutching each other as we prayed to God. The power had gone out, shattering my dreams of watching cartoons, so we listened to a battery-powered radio instead. The announcer's voice crackled through the static, warning that this storm was bigger than anyone had expected. My mother and Angel were crying, their sobs mixing with the storm's chaos. My father, usually so steady, sat in the kitchen, staring into space with his hands cradling his head, as if the weight of the world rested there. I couldn't stay in that tense room any longer. I slipped away to my own bedroom, drawn to the wooden boards covering my window. Peering through a small gap, I saw darkness and chaos outside. The street I'd grown up on, where I'd played and ridden my bike, looked like a raging river. Water surged through it, carrying debris in its current. Then I saw something that froze my heart, a wheelchair tumbling through the floodwaters like a rag doll. I wondered who it belonged to, where they were, if they were safe. The sight broke me. Tears streamed down my face as I watched the world I knew fall apart. I wasn't as religious as my parents, but that night, I prayed harder than I ever had, staring up at the crucified Jesus nailed above my bed, begging for safety, for the storm to pass. Around 11 p.m., a new sound cut through the storm's whispers, whistling. Not the wind's eerie wail, but a distinct human whistle, like someone was trying to sing a song. It went on for a few minutes, faint but persistent. I was too scared to look outside again, my heart pounding as I huddled in my room. I didn't think much of it then, but that sound would haunt me later. 2 days passed, though I don't remember much of them. The storm had left our neighborhood unrecognizable, and we ended up on our rooftop, waiting for rescue. Our neighbor, Miss Dupuy, was with us, her face etched with grief. She told us her elderly mother had passed away when her oxygen machine failed, her body still inside their flooded home. The heat was unbearable, close to 100 degrees, and we had almost no water. I remember thinking, as I sat on that sweltering roof, that this might be where I'd die. Sometime that day, my father stood at the edge of the roof to relieve himself. He stumbled back, his face pale with shock. I followed his gaze and saw it, a body, presumably an old, homeless black man, his cap flopped over his head, his frail frame mangled against a fence, face down in the dark, murky water. We were told not to look, but the image seared itself into my mind. My father tried to shield us, but the horror was inescapable. From that point, my memories blur. Eventually, we were rescued and taken to the convention center in New Orleans. Days later, we were relocated to Texas. It was there, reflecting on those terrifying days, that I realized the whistling I'd heard that night came from the man I'd seen in the water. His body was found parallel to my bedroom window. I don't know why he was whistling. Maybe he knew death was coming and chose to sing one last song as he clung to the fence, the elements overwhelming him. Or maybe he was whistling for help I heard but was too scared to act on. That thought has gnawed at me ever since. It's been nearly 12 years since Katrina tore through our lives. My family left Louisiana for good, moving to Maryland to stay with relatives. We haven't been back since. I think about that whistling man often, wondering if his family ever found him, if he was loved. I hope he was. The hurricane took so much from us, but it left me with questions that may never have answers. In late 2006, I was fresh out of high school, a country girl navigating the chaos of college life in a big city. At 18, I was on my own for the first time, juggling a new job that ate up most of my hours to support myself. I made friends quickly, but I soon learned the hard way about moochers, those so-called friends who always had a sob story, needing you to cover their bills because they were short this month. As someone new to living independently, I fell for it thinking they genuinely needed help. I tightened my belt, worked longer shifts, and stretched my budget to the breaking point. Before long, I was paying for everything: rent, utilities, even their groceries, while I barely had enough to eat, surviving on ramen noodles for weeks. It was around this time that one of my new acquaintances started pestering me to go on a blind date with a friend named Connor. I brushed it off at first, not keen on the idea of dating a stranger when I was already stretched thin. But they were persistent, assuring me it would just be a casual dinner and a movie, and the kicker, Connor would pay. That caught my attention. The thought of a real meal, not just another packet of noodles, and a night out that didn't involve work was too tempting to resist. They hyped Connor up, saying he was sweet, shy, and such a nice guy, but he'd been struggling since starting college. They described him as retreating into his shell, becoming hard to talk to, and acting oddly, like the transition to college life had thrown him off balance. They thought a fun night out with someone new might help him snap out of it. I was skeptical, but when they mentioned it would be just one date and I'd have the night off, I reluctantly agreed. They wasted no time setting up the day for that very evening, my first day off in weeks. Since I didn't have a cell phone, they arranged for Connor to pick me up outside a local ice cream shop in his red car, so I know it was him. I showed up at the agreed time, standing outside the shop, the cold air biting at my fingers as I waited. 20 minutes passed, and I started to feel foolish, wondering if I should just walk home. Then a red car screeched up, pulling way too close to the curb. A guy stepped out, Connor, I presumed. He was about 5'6", with short, buzz-blonde hair, big round glasses, and a polo shirt that looked too neat for the haphazard way he parked. He rushed around to my side, opened the door, and placed a hand on the small of my back, urging me to get in quick because we'd be late. That was my first red flag. His pushiness felt off, but I chalked it up to him being a bit of a jerk and got in, hoping the night would improve. As we drove, Connor started firing questions at me, wanting to know everything about my life. I was happy to fill the silence, as his lack of contribution made the air feel heavy and awkward. I kept it light, sharing funny stories and anecdotes, careful not to reveal anything too personal to someone I just met. But as the car rolled on, I began to notice something unsettling. The city's familiar glow of streetlights and signs had faded. I wasn't just lost in the way you feel when you're new to a city. This was different. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen a road sign or any lights at all. A chill ran through me as I realized Connor was keeping me talking, probably to distract me from noticing where we were going. My heart sank. I was alone in a car with a stranger, heading who knows, with no phone and roommates who wouldn't notice I was gone until the bills were due. I felt like an idiot for getting into this situation, but I pushed the self-blame aside. I needed to focus. I decided to play dumb, acting oblivious while I scanned for any clue about our location. I started asking him questions to keep him distracted. What movie were we seeing? What kind of food would we have after? How did he know the friend who set us up? I kept my tone light, all while subtly searching for the door's unlock button. Then, in the distance, I spotted a gas station sign. Relief washed over me. If I could just find the unlock button, I could tuck and roll out of the car and sprint to safety. But as I fumbled discreetly, the car suddenly stopped. Connor threw it into park and jumped out, just as another man slid into the back driver's side seat and slammed the door shut. My stomach dropped. Connor turned to the guy in the back, launching into a loud conversation, which gave me a moment to search for the button without being noticed. I found it, pressed it quietly, and pulled the handle, praying the door would open. Nothing. I pushed harder, pulling again. Still nothing. My heart raced as I realized the door wouldn't budge. It was locked from the inside, and the only way out was through the driver's side. As Connor argued with a man in the back, I pieced together the truth. The guy was his drug dealer, and Connor owed him money for cocaine. Apparently, Connor's odd behavior since starting college was a full-blown drug habit, and he was in deep debt. From their conversation, I gathered he was using me as leverage, a bargaining chip to stall the dealer while he supposedly went to get the money. I sat frozen, staring straight ahead, avoiding eye contact with the dealer to keep things neutral in case this turned worse. The silence stretched on, feeling like an eternity, until the dealer spoke up, his voice cutting through the tension. "Hey, honey, want to go out back behind a gas station and blow me for some coke?" I was stunned, unsure how to respond. Instinct took over, and I let out a high-pitched, almost musical, "No, thank you." To my surprise, he burst out laughing, a deep, genuine laugh that made me chuckle nervously too. "Damn girl, you got like self-respect and shit," he said, still laughing. I shrugged, managing a weak, "I try, sir," which sent him into another round of laughter. We both ended up chuckling for a few minutes, the tension easing slightly. He asked what I was doing with a guy like Connor, and I figured honesty was my best bet at this point. I told him the whole story, how I was new to the city, broke from supporting mooching friends, and got roped into this blind date for a free meal. I admitted I'd tried to escape when the car stopped, but the door wouldn't open. He nodded, then apologized, which caught me off guard. He explained he was also a college student, dealing on the side to make ends meet until he graduated. Connor, from a wealthy family, had been a good client at first but spiraled into debt fast, hitting the drugs too hard. He was supposed to meet the dealer here to pay up, but instead, he jumped out, made excuses about the money being on its way, and left me in the car as collateral before running off into the woods. I was still processing this when I heard hushed arguing and stomping from the direction Connor had gone. A taller guy appeared, dragging Connor back to the car. Breathlessly, he apologized for Connor's actions, calling him an idiot and saying this was all a huge mistake. He handed the dealer something, presumably money, as he said it was all there plus a little extra, and assured him Connor wouldn't bother him again. The dealer got out, looking annoyed but satisfied, and left. The tall guy introduced himself as Kyle, Connor's roommate. As we drove back to the city, Kyle explained what had happened. When Connor returned to their apartment earlier, acting overly cheerful despite being in debt to a dealer, Kyle got suspicious. After pressing him, Connor admitted he picked up a girl and left her in the car with the dealer as a way to pay off his debt. Kyle was furious, demanding to know how that was supposed to work and what was wrong with him. Apparently, Connor's brilliant plan came from watching too many TV shows where drug dealers accepted women as payment. Kyle had smacked him around, forced him to stop at an ATM to withdraw the dealer's money, and march him back through the woods to settle things and get me out of there. As we drove, Kyle kept hitting Connor in the back of the head, berating him. "What the hell made you think kidnapping some girl was a good idea? Did you think you'd just never see your dealer again? You have a class with him on Monday, dude." Connor mumbled a weak apology, clearly cowed by Kyle's anger. The car was quiet for a while, and I sat there, marveling at my luck. I'd been kidnapped by a complete moron, saved by the world's kindest drug dealer, and a roommate who doubled as an aggressive moral compass. They dropped me off downtown. I didn't want them knowing where I lived. I thanked Kyle profusely, and he made me promise not to go to cops, saying they had futures and whatnot. I agreed, figuring I owed him that much. They drove off, and I walked home, vowing to never let myself end up in a situation like that again. That night, I ate my ramen noodles with a new resolve, determined to be smarter, tougher, and never so desperate for a free meal that I'd ignore my instincts. In 1995, I was a 20-year-old single mother living in a small fourplex in Arlington, Washington, still clinging to the big hair and vibrant spirit of the 80s. My two daughters, ages 1 and 3, were my world, and our home was a cozy studio apartment where I could see every corner of the space except the bathroom. We slept on a pull-out couch bed, a practical setup for our little family. To fill the quiet hours when the girls napped or after chores were done, I'd visit the local library, my haven for indulging my love of the paranormal. I'd always been fascinated by ghost stories and the supernatural, so my reading naturally leaned toward the eerie and unexplained. On one trip, I checked out two books that caught my eye, one about the true story behind The Exorcist and another called The Demonologist, which chronicled the case studies of Ed and Lorraine Warren. I'd heard of the Warrens before, renowned paranormal investigators who tackled high-profile cases like the Amityville Horror. They were respected, especially by the Catholic Church, for their work in demonic infestations and exorcisms. I admired their courage and expertise, but I'd never read their stories in depth. The Demonologist was a gripping collection of accounts about ordinary people plagued by malevolent forces. Ed Warren, a demonologist, uses knowledge of the paranormal and Catholic exorcism rites to rid homes of these entities, often succeeding where others failed. The book detailed the terrifying activity that preceded these exorcisms, and I devoured it, relishing the thrill of fear it sparked, like watching a scary movie. I'd read it before bed without issue, savoring the adrenaline rush. The Exorcist book, however, was different. Its raw, disturbing details hit too close to home for a young mother living alone with two small children. After a few chapters, I decided it was too intense and returned both books to the library, eager to move on with my routine. That night, after putting my daughters to bed and watching a bit of TV, I climbed into the couch bed and settled in. As I lay there, a strange sound filled the air, swishing like the flapping of wings, as if birds were circling my head. Startled, I swatted at the air, expecting to shoo something away, but there was nothing there. Confused, I brushed it off as a random noise, maybe a quirk of the old apartment, and eventually drifted off to sleep. At 3 a.m., I jolted awake to the same flapping sound, this time so close I could almost feel the wings brushing my face. I shot upright, heart pounding, but again, there was nothing. The noise stopped as suddenly as it had started. In the darkness, I noticed shadowy forms swirling near the fireplace across the room. With all the lights off, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks in the dark. I lay back down, uneasy but determined to sleep. The next morning, everything seemed normal, and the day passed without incident. But that night, after tucking the girls in, the flapping returned, louder and more insistent. I felt it close to my face again, and this time, I clearly saw those shadowy shapes drifting and morphing in the corner of the room. My cat, usually calm, was staring at the same spot, his hair standing on end, a low growl rumbling in his throat. My pulse raced. This wasn't my imagination. Something was wrong. Too scared to turn off the lights, I kept the TV on all night, huddling on the couch, trying to drown out the fear. By morning, a heavy sense of dread settled over me. I felt uneasy, like something was watching, waiting. I took the girls for a walk to clear my head, but as we strolled down the sidewalk, the wing-like noises followed me, accompanied by faint whispers behind me. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound froze me in place. How could this be happening in broad daylight? It felt like whatever was haunting me was mocking me, saying, "I can still get you day or night." I no longer felt safe, especially with my daughters depending on me. Desperate for company, I invited my 13-year-old sister to stay with me. She was into the paranormal too, though I wasn't sure how much she believed my story when I told her what was happening. The first few nights with my sister were mostly quiet, though I still caught glimpses of shadows in my peripheral vision and heard the occasional flapping. My daughters and sister seemed unaffected, which was a small relief. But one evening, as we watched TV after putting the girls to bed, my cat started acting strange. He stood at the edge of the kitchen, staring into the darkness, his eyes wide and fixed on something I couldn't see. His fur bristled, and he let out a deep, guttural growl. My sister and I exchanged a look, the air growing heavy. Suddenly, the cat bolted, tearing across the apartment like he'd seen a ghost. We sat frozen, unsure what to make of it. The next night, I was washing dishes in my tiny kitchen. The studio's limited counter space meant I had to lay a towel on the stove to set wet dishes on before drying them. I placed a clean plate on the towel, and to my shock, it started spinning like a coin dropped on a table. It wasn't on a hard surface, and it was wet, so the movement defied logic. I stared, baffled, as it slowed and stopped. Shaking it off, I continued washing, trying to rationalize it as a fluke. Later that evening, alone while my sister was out with friends and the girls were asleep, I was reading in the living room when a loud slam echoed from the kitchen. It sounded like a cupboard door being flung shut with force. Heart pounding, I crept toward the bathroom, where I saw the cabinet door swing open one final time before stopping. I checked inside, but there was nothing. No loose hinges, no objects that could have caused it. A dark, terrifying feeling washed over me, like a shadow creeping into my soul. I didn't feel safe in my own home anymore. The next day, I started piecing things together. In The Demonologist, the Warrens had warned about Ouija boards, calling them a Pandora's box that could invite malevolent entities into your life. As a teenager, I'd used one several times, including alone, like an idiot, not knowing the risks. I'd had creepy experiences back then, but nothing so bad that I stopped. I'd outgrown that phase, but I remembered I still had the Ouija board I'd made as a kid. It was crafted from the back of a 1960s Monopoly board my dad had owned, with letters, numbers, and yes and no written on it. The front was decorated with my own abstract art, a colorful swirl of designs I'd once thought was cool. For a planchette, I'd used a jar lid or whatever I could find. That board was still in the back room of my apartment. Convinced it was the source of the disturbances, I decided to get rid of it. I retrieved the board, feeling a pang of nostalgia for the naive teen who'd made it, but the recent events overshadowed any fondness. Holding it felt wrong, like it carried a weight beyond its physical form. I took it outside and tossed it into the dumpster, my heart racing as I walked back inside. I half expected to find it waiting at my door the next day, like something out of a horror movie. I tried to rationalize everything. Maybe I was hysterical from reading those books, imagining things. But the cat's behavior, the spinning plate, the slamming cupboards, those weren't my imagination. A few days later, the uneasiness hadn't faded. I was anxious, struggling to be a normal mom while gripped by fear. One night, as my sister and daughter slept, I lay awake watching infomercials, praying the dread would lift. The wing noises returned, louder than ever, making my heart race. Then, a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard shattered the silence, like 500 iron pots crashing onto concrete, coming from the garage. I froze, terror coursing through me. Unable to bear it alone, I called my parents, who lived just around a corner, sobbing hysterically. I couldn't explain what was happening, only that I was scared. My mother rushed over, but I had to go through the garage to let her in, and I was terrified of what I'd find. When I opened the garage door and flipped on the light, I gasped. Everything, tools, boxes, shelves, was scattered on the floor, as if a tornado had torn through. I waded through the mess to reach the door, my hand shaking as I let my mom in. She tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe something fell, maybe it was the wind, but nothing made sense. My daughters slept through it all, but my sister woke up to my screams. Once I calmed down, my mom went home, likely worried I was losing my mind. Exhausted, I finally fell asleep, my sister watching over the girls so I could rest. After that night, the activity began to fade. The flapping noises stopped, the shadows vanished, and the oppressive dread lifted. Eventually, it all went away. I moved to a house a few blocks away, and life felt normal again. But the experience left a mark. I felt that same fear and anxiety a couple of times since, like whatever I'd encountered was reminding me it could return. It's been years, and I steer clear of Ouija boards now. Any paranormal experiments, like EVP sessions, I approach with extreme caution. I believe that experience was a warning, a message that I'd opened a door as a teenager, and it still cracked open. Reading The Demonologist made me realize I'd been reckless, dabbling in things I didn't understand. The spirit world is real, and it's not to be trifled with. Some doors, once opened, don't close easily, and whatever's behind them can find you, no matter where you go. I learned to respect that world, and to never open that door again. During my third and final year of nursing training at a hospital in southeast England, an unsettling incident occurred that still gives me chills when I think about it. The hospital had decided to refurbish the ward where I was assigned, so all the patients, staff, and essential equipment were relocated to an overflow ward to allow the builders to work without restrictions. As any student nurse will tell you, we're often asked to pitch in with all sorts of tasks, some of which have little to do with our studies, but it's all part of the experience, I suppose. On the day of the move, I was rostered to be on placement, and let me tell you, it was a logistical nightmare. Moving patients, equipment, and staff safely was no small feat, but I was happy to help out where needed. We managed to transfer the patients and the bulk of the essential equipment to the new ward within a few hours. As the last patient was being wheeled off the ward sister asked me to turn off the patient call bell system at the mains. Once that was done, we left the now empty ward behind. After settling the patients into the overflow ward and putting away most of the items we brought over, I was tasked with returning to the empty ward to gather some non-essential items that had been left behind. These were mundane things like spare extension cords, paper, stationery supplies, and information pinned to the display boards. The plan was to load them into a few metal cages on wheels for easy transport. As I stepped into the deserted ward, a wave of anxiety washed over me. The place was eerily quiet, and I felt a creeping sense of unease. I was completely alone. No other staff, no patients, just me and the echoing silence of the empty ward. The ward sister had promised to join me in about an hour to help move the cages, but until then, I was on my own, and boy, did I feel it. The stillness was oppressive, and every creak or distant sound seemed amplified in the absence of the usual bustle. I set to work, filling the cages near the nurse's station with the leftover items. After about half an hour, I was nearly done, just tossing the last few bits and pieces into the cages, when out of nowhere, a patient call bell went off. I nearly jumped out of my skin. For those unfamiliar, every patient bed space, side room, and toilet or shower room has a call bell buzzer that patients can press to alert staff when they need assistance. There's also an emergency buzzer, usually pulled by staff in critical situations, but this was just a standard patient call bell. The problem? I had personally turned off the system at the mains when the last patient left. There was no way it should have been ringing. My heart pounded, and I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what I'd just heard. Instinct kicked in, and despite my fear, I felt compelled to check if someone actually needed help. I walked toward the source of the sound, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridor, every step feeling heavier than the last. Unsurprisingly, when I reached the room where the bell had rung, it was empty. No patient, no staff, nothing. I reset the buzzer, my hands trembling slightly, and decided I'd had enough of being alone in there. I hurried back to the entrance of the ward to wait for the sister, my nerves on edge as I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting something to jump out at me. Thankfully, I didn't have to wait long. The ward sister arrived shortly after, and I spilled the whole story about the call bell. We had a good working relationship, so she took me seriously, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. She told me that if I didn't want to go back into the ward, I didn't have to, but I didn't want to let her or the team down. Steeling myself, I agreed to go back in with her to finish the job. We needed to retrieve 2 mobile computers from the far end of the ward, so we started walking down the long, dimly lit corridor together. As we moved deeper into the ward, I could have sworn I heard footsteps behind us, soft, deliberate taps that didn't match our own. My stomach churned, but I kept quiet, not wanting to sound paranoid. Then, out of nowhere, the sister stopped, turned to me with wide eyes and mouth. "Can you hear that?" My heart skipped a beat as I nodded, confirming that I wasn't imagining it. We quickened our pace, practically speed-walking to the computers, grabbed them, and started heading back. The air felt thick with tension, and I kept my eyes forward, resisting the urge to look behind me. As we made our way back toward the entrance, pushing the metal cages, we heard another sound, this time a rhythmic tapping, like a wooden walking stick striking the old-fashioned radiators in one of the side rooms. My nerve was completely gone by this point. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, but the sister, braver than I was, marched toward the room to investigate. I watched her silhouette in the doorway as she peered inside, and the noise stopped the moment she stepped in. The room was empty, just as I'd expected but dreaded. No one was there, no patient, no staff, no walking stick. Once we'd gathered everything and gotten out of there, we sat down and talked about what had happened. Neither of us felt threatened or in danger, which was strange in itself. The sounds, the call bell, the footsteps, the tapping, they didn't feel malicious. It was almost as if whatever was causing them was having a bit of fun. Now that the ward was quiet and empty, free from the usual chaos of patients and staff, maybe they were making their presence known, no longer drowned out by the hustle and bustle or mistaken for a patient's call. It was creepy, no doubt, but there was an odd sense of playfulness to it, like they were just reminding us they were still there. By the time this incident occurred, I had qualified as a registered nurse and was working night shifts on a ward we had recently moved due to the refurbishment of our original ward. Our night shift team typically consisted of 2 registered nurses, including myself, and 2 healthcare support workers. The other nurse on shift with me was someone who had been my mentor during my management placement. She was deeply fascinated by all things paranormal, ghosts, spirits, you name it. I'm a believer too, but I tend to approach strange occurrences with a bit of skepticism, always trying to find a logical explanation, even if it's a stretch. The layout of this new ward was a bit unusual, so bear with me as I describe it. As you entered through the double doors, there was a 4-bedded female bay immediately to your left. Directly opposite was the kitchen, which patients weren't allowed to use for health and safety reasons. Just past the first female bay on the left, there were some storage cupboards, followed by a second 4-bedded female bay. Opposite this second bay was the nurse's station, which served as the central hub of the ward. From there, the corridor split in 2 directions. If you continued straight ahead, you'd find 5 female side rooms, 3 on the left and 2 on the right, along with another storeroom. If you turned right at the nurse's station, you'd reach a 4-bedded male bay directly opposite the station, followed by 8 male side rooms and a day room further down. Our night shift routine was fairly standard. After completing the medication rounds, settling the patients for the night, and catching up on any tasks left over from the day team, we'd settle at the nurse's station to tackle the mountain of paperwork that needed updating for each patient. The nurse's station had a few small nightlights to help us see our notes and charts, but the rest of the ward was cloaked in darkness, which made it easy for your eyes to play tricks on you in the dim, quiet atmosphere. On this particular night, it was just past midnight, and all 4 of us, 2 nurses and 2 healthcare support workers, were gathered at the nurse's station, plowing through paperwork. The ward was still, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, broken only by the occasional soft snore from a patient or the hum of medical equipment. Suddenly, we were startled by a rattling sound coming from the drinks trolley, which was parked just outside the kitchen. This trolley held a hot drinks machine and a stack of mugs, neatly arranged for the next drinks round. The mugs were clinking and shaking, as if someone was jostling the trolley, but when we looked, there was no one anywhere near it. The ward was empty except for us and the sleeping patients. Curiosity got the better of us, and we spent the next 15 minutes inspecting the trolley, trying to figure out what could have caused the noise. We checked for loose wheels, uneven flooring, or anything else that might explain the rattling, but we came up empty-handed. We even tested shaking the trolley ourselves to see if we could recreate the sound, but nothing matched what we'd heard. With no answers, we shared a nervous laugh, chalked it up to one of those weird hospital moments, and returned to our paperwork, though I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my chest. A few hours later, the 2 healthcare support workers had gone for their breaks, overlapping as we usually did to ensure coverage at reasonable times. My colleague, the other nurse, and I had just finished our routine walk around the ward, checking that all the patients were either settled or asleep and safe. We just returned to the nurse's station when we heard a new sound, a metallic scraping, like a Zimmer frame being dragged across the floor, coming from the direction of the female side rooms. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't be alarming, but every patient in those rooms either needed 1 or 2 staff members to help them get out of bed or was completely bedbound. The idea of one of them moving a frame on their own was impossible. Concerned that someone might be trying to get up and risk a fall, we hurried to investigate. We checked each of the female side rooms, moving quietly so as not to disturb the sleeping patients. Everyone was fast asleep, tucked into their beds, and the noise had stopped as soon as we started looking. Puzzled but relieved, we headed back to the nurse's station, trying to convince ourselves it was nothing. But just a few minutes later, the same scraping sound echoed through the ward again. This time, as we retraced our steps, we noticed something odd in one of the side rooms. A Zimmer frame, which we were sure had been positioned at the foot of the patient's bed earlier, was now next to the en-suite toilet. My colleague was adamant that it hadn't been there before, but the patient in that room was snoring peacefully, clearly undisturbed. We exchanged uneasy glances but continued checking the remaining side rooms to be thorough. Everything seemed fine, so we turned to head back to the desk. As we passed the room with the misplaced frame, we froze. The frame had moved again. Now it was right by the entrance to the side room, angled as if someone had used it to peer out into the main corridor. The patient was still in bed, fast asleep, oblivious to the world. My heart was racing, and I could see the same shock mirrored in my colleague's eyes. She was the braver one, stepping forward to move the frame back into the room, but I was thoroughly freaked out. A Zimmer frame doesn't just move on its own, and the way it was positioned felt deliberate, like someone or something had been watching us. We made it back to the nurse's station, our nerves frayed, and tried to focus on our work. The rest of the shift passed without further incident, and by the time I went for my break, I was starting to question whether we'd imagined the whole thing. But when I returned, one of the healthcare support workers pulled me aside. She told me that while I was gone, she found the same Zimmer frame outside another one of the female side rooms. No one had any idea how it had gotten there. The patient in that room was still asleep, and none of the staff had moved it. We all agreed it was beyond strange, and the thought of that frame moving on its own sent a shiver down my spine. It was one of those nights that left us all a little rattled, wondering what else might be lingering in the shadows of that ward. I'm a 25-year-old woman living in a high-crime rate city with my boyfriend. At the time of this incident, I was recovering from a double ear infection that had ruptured my left eardrum, leaving me nearly deaf in that ear. This detail is important because it affected how I experienced what happened. My hearing was significantly better in my right ear, which played a big role in how things unfolded. I'd taken a few sick days from work to give my ears a chance to heal, so I was home alone on the morning this all went down. My boyfriend left for work at his usual time, 6 a.m., giving me a quick kiss goodbye as I lay in bed. We sleep with a white noise machine because neither of us likes complete silence, and my boyfriend finds a fan too chilly. After he left, I drifted back to sleep, lulled by the steady hum of the machine. I'm normally a heavy sleeper, so I was completely out for about an hour. Around 7 a.m., I was jolted awake by the neighbor's German Shepherd barking like crazy right outside my bedroom window on the right side of the house. She was tied up out there, as she often was, but this wasn't her usual bark. She was going berserk, growling, barking, and even scratching at the side of my house, her claws scraping against the exterior wall. The sound was loud enough to cut through my grogginess, especially since my right ear was picking up everything clearly. As I woke up, turning my head slightly to the left to better hear the dog with my good ear, something caught my eye. In my peripheral vision, I saw a figure dart from the hallway outside my bedroom and into the bathroom across the hall. My heart stopped. I knew my boyfriend was at work, and there was no one else who had any business being in our house at 7 a.m. on a Friday. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay silent and still. I didn't want whoever was in there to know I'd seen them. My mind raced. This wasn't a random noise or a trick of the light. There was an intruder in my home. With my heart pounding in my chest, I carefully reached for my phone on the nightstand, moving as slowly as possible to avoid making a sound. I dialed 911, my fingers trembling as I pressed the buttons. I didn't speak to the operator. I couldn't risk the intruder hearing me. Instead, I stayed quiet, clutching the phone tightly, hoping the call would be enough to alert the police to my location. I lay there, barely breathing, every second stretching into an eternity as I listened for any sign of the intruder. The dog was still barking furiously outside, her growls adding to the tension that filled the air. About 10 minutes later, I heard the faint wail of sirens approaching. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. As soon as the sound of the sirens reached the house, I heard movement, fast, frantic footsteps. Peeking cautiously from under the covers, I saw the man bolt out of the bathroom and down the hallway. I crept to my bedroom doorway, my heart in my throat, and caught a glimpse of him sprinting into the living room toward the front door. The sirens were louder now, and I realized the police must have already pulled up outside. The intruder seemed to sense this too, because he suddenly changed course, veering into the kitchen toward the side door. Seizing the moment, I took a deep breath and ran for the front door to meet the police. My legs felt like jelly, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I flung the door open just as a police officer was approaching. The intruder had made it out the side door, but he didn't get far. I learned later that another officer had been circling the house and tackled him as he tried to flee. Shaking and still in shock, I explained everything to the police. What I'd seen, how I'd woken up to the dogs barking, and how I'd called 911 without speaking. They were calm and professional, taking me to the station to give a formal statement. At the station, I learned the chilling truth about the man who'd broken into my home. He was a wanted rapist, known for targeting white, blonde women in their 20s in our area, women like me. The police believed he'd been watching me for a while, noting my boyfriend's routine and realizing I was home alone that morning. They found evidence that he'd picked the lock on our front door, which my boyfriend had forgotten to secure with the deadbolt when he left for work. The thought that he'd been studying my movements sent a shiver down my spine. If it hadn't been for the neighbor's dog going wild and waking me up, I might not have noticed him in time. And if I hadn't called 911 silently, things could have ended very differently. I'm beyond grateful for that German Shepherd. Her relentless barking saved me from becoming that man's next victim. When I got back from the police station, I bought her a big bag of dog treats as a thank you, dropping them off with my neighbor. The whole experience left me shaken, but it also made me realize how lucky I was to have escaped unharmed. It's a reminder I'll carry with me forever. Sometimes it's the smallest things, like a dog's bark, that can make all the difference. This story isn't mine, but comes from my ex-boyfriend, Shane, who used to share all sorts of creepy experiences from his past. This one, though, stood out as the most unsettling, and it still gives me goosebumps when I think about it. It happened when Shane was a teenager, spending a weekend with his younger brother, Hunter, and their friend Josh in a small town in Missouri. Josh's family lived out in the country and had a decent amount of money, which meant they owned a sprawling piece of land that stretched far into the surrounding countryside. The boys loved exploring every inch of it whenever they got the chance, treating the fields and woods like their personal playground. On this particular day, the three of them were out adventuring, wandering farther than usual. They reached a fence marking the boundary of Josh's family's property and, feeling adventurous, decided to climb over it to explore the rolling fields beyond. The landscape was open and grassy, likely used for cattle grazing, with hardly any trees or landmarks to break the monotony. They walked for quite a while, their excitement fading as the endless expanse of grass grew boring. Just as they were starting to lose interest, they spotted something in the distance, a small hill covered with trees at the top and partially on the sides. It stood out starkly against the flat, featureless field, drawing their curiosity like a magnet. The hill's unusual presence, with its cluster of trees hiding the summit, felt strangely out of place, and the boys couldn't resist checking it out. As they approached the base of the hill, where they could finally see the top, they stopped dead in their tracks. There, nestled among the trees, was a refrigerator. The boys exchanged puzzled glances, their expressions mirroring a mix of confusion and unease. Shane felt a sinking sensation growing in his stomach, a gut instinct that something wasn't right. Josh tried to brush it off with a nervous laugh, saying, "It's probably just some junk someone thought would look great up here, I guess." He and Hunter started climbing the hill to get a closer look, their curiosity outweighing their caution. Shane, however, stayed rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed on the refrigerator as a sense of dread crept over him. He scanned the surrounding fields nervously, checking for any sign that they were being watched. As Josh and Hunter reached the top, Shane's attention was drawn to something else. The ground at the base of the hill was mostly dirt, but only in a distinct rectangular patch which seemed odd in the middle of the grassy field. He walked around it, kicking at the dirt with his shoe, trying to make sense of it. Suddenly, Hunter's voice broke the silence, loud and startled. "Whoa, that's really messed up," he shouted. Shane looked up to see Josh and Hunter standing next to the refrigerator, their faces pale. "It's got chains and locks around it," Hunter called down. Shane's heart skipped a beat as he ran up the hill to join them. Sure enough, the refrigerator was wrapped tightly with heavy chains and padlocks, securing it shut. Upon closer inspection, They realized it wasn't some old, discarded appliance. It was fairly new with minimal wear, as if it hadn't been out there for long. The sight of it, locked up tight in the middle of nowhere, sent Shane's mind racing with dark possibilities. His first thought was that there could be a human body inside, or something equally horrific. Whoever had put it there might still be nearby. His nerves fraying, Shane urged the others to leave, his voice tight with urgency. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were trespassing on something dangerous, something they weren't meant to find. The boys started back down the hill, their earlier excitement replaced by a heavy silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what could be inside that refrigerator. Josh reached the bottom first and suddenly froze. "What's that?" he asked, kicking at something shiny protruding from the dirt in the rectangular patch. The boys gathered around, their curiosity piqued despite their growing fear. Josh bent down to pull at it, but it wouldn't budge. They started digging around it with their hands, realizing it was part of something much larger buried beneath the surface. As they uncovered more, Shane's blood ran cold. It was the top corner of a car headlight. He stood up, his eyes darting over the rectangular patch, the horrifying realization hitting him like a freight train. They were standing on top of a buried car, just yards away from a heavily locked refrigerator in the middle of nowhere. There was no rational explanation for this. The grim thoughts they'd all been suppressing, that something sinister was hidden here, suddenly felt all too possible. Shane's pulse raced, his mind screaming that they needed to get out of there. At that moment, a sound pierced the air, the low rumble of a vehicle approaching in the distance. Shane peered through the trees and saw a rusty reddish Ford truck heading straight toward them across the field. Panic set in. The boys bolted to the far side of the hill, ducking behind the sparse trees for cover. Running back through the open field wasn't an option. They'd be too exposed, easily spotted and chased down. The trees were their only shelter as the truck's headlights swept across the hill, the sun beginning to set and casting long shadows around them. Shane's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst, his ears ringing and a wave of nausea washing over him. The truck stopped, and the engine cut off, plunging the area into an eerie silence. Two men stepped out, their flashlights cutting through the dimming light. They were dressed casually, like typical country folks, button-down shirts and jeans, but their presence felt menacing. They walked up the hill, shining their lights on the refrigerator and dangerously close to where the boys were hiding. Shane held his breath, his body pressed against a tree, praying they wouldn't be seen. One of the men suddenly grabbed the other's arm, pointing toward the rectangular patch where the boys had disturbed the dirt around a headlight. For a few agonizing seconds, the men's attention was fixed on the spot, their voices low and urgent. Seizing the moment, Josh motioned frantically to Shane and Hunter, and the three of them broke into a dead sprint down the opposite side of the hill. Adrenaline surged through Shane's veins as he ran, his lungs burning and his legs trembling beneath him. He didn't dare look back, but he heard the men shouting after them, their voices sharp and angry. The truck's engine roared to life, and the sound of it closing in behind them sent a fresh wave of terror through Shane. He ran faster than he ever had in his life, his body pushed to its limits, the fence they'd crossed earlier now their only hope of escape. They reached the fence and scrambled over it, the truck's headlights glaring on their backs as they stumbled into the woods on Josh's family's property. Branches scratched at their faces and arms, but they kept running, weaving through the trees until they could see the lights of Josh's house in the distance. Exhausted and gasping for air, they collapsed onto the front deck, drenched in sweat and shaking from the ordeal. Their chests heaved as they tried to catch their breath, the reality of what they just escaped sinking in. The rest of the night was spent holed up in Josh's room, the three of them barely speaking, their minds replaying the terrifying encounter. They were too shaken to process it fully, their thoughts consumed by what might have been in that refrigerator, whose car was buried in that dirt, and what could have happened if those men had caught them. Josh convinced Shane and Hunter not to tell anyone, worried they'd get in trouble for trespassing, and that his parents might try to confront the men, putting themselves in danger. They never returned to that field, and the incident was never spoken of again among them. Shane later confided in me that he still has nightmares about that day. The image of that chained refrigerator and the buried car haunts him, and he's plagued by regret for not reporting it to the police. He spent countless sleepless nights wondering what was inside that refrigerator, who the car belonged to, and what those men would have done if they'd caught them. The uncertainty and the chilling possibilities have stayed with him, a lingering shadow from a day that started as an innocent adventure and turned into a brush with something truly sinister. I never should have stopped for gas that night, but with my tank on empty and the next town over 50 miles away, I didn't have much choice. As I pulled into the deserted station, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't quite place it. The neon open sign flickered faintly in the window, casting an eerie red glow across the cracked pavement. I stepped out of my car, the cool night air raising goosebumps on my arms. The station stood alone on the empty highway, surrounded by darkness on all sides. No other buildings, no streetlights, just an island of dim fluorescent light in a sea of black. I walked to the pump, my footsteps echoing in the silence. As I reached for the nozzle, a movement caught my eye through the grimy window of the station. A figure stood motionless behind the counter. I waved, trying to be friendly, but they didn't move, just stood there, staring. Shaking off my unease, I focused on filling my tank. The pump clicked rhythmically, the only sound aside from the whisper of wind through the nearby trees. I kept glancing at the window, but the figure remained still, unblinking. With my tank full, I replaced the nozzle and screwed on the gas cap. I'd have to go inside to pay, and my stomach twisted at the thought. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and walked to the door. A bell jingled as I entered, the sound jarringly cheerful in the oppressive quiet. The inside of the station was dimly lit, with shelves stocked with dusty snacks and faded magazines. Behind the counter stood the attendant, a tall, gaunt man with sunken eyes and sallow skin. "Evening," I said, forcing a smile. "Just the gas on pump 3, please." The man didn't respond. He didn't even blink, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. I cleared my throat. "A pump 3. How much do I owe you?" Slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, the corners of his mouth turned up. It wasn't a smile. It was more like his face was cracking, revealing something underneath that wasn't meant to be seen. "You don't owe anything," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "You can't leave anyway." My heart began to race. "What do you mean I can't leave?" He leaned forward, his grin widening to impossible proportions. "Your car won't start." "None of them ever do." I backed away, my hand fumbling for the door handle. "I'm just going to go check on that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm sure it's fine." I burst out of the station, not caring if I seemed rude. I just needed to get back to my car to get out of here. As I rushed across the parking lot, I pressed the button on my key fob. Nothing happened, no lights, no chirp of the locks. Reaching my car, I yanked on the handle. It was unlocked. I slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine sputtered weakly, then fell silent. "No, no, no," I muttered, trying again and again. Each time the same result, a weak attempt at life, then nothing. I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. The attendant was outside now, walking toward me with that same terrible grin. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on strings. I locked the doors, my hands shaking. The attendant kept coming, his eyes fixed on me. He reached the car and placed one pale hand on the window. "I told you," he said, his voice muffled through the glass. "None of them ever leave." I scrambled for my phone, praying for a signal. Nothing, not even one bar. I was trapped. The attendant began to circle the car, dragging his hand along the metal. The scraping sound set my teeth on edge. I tried the engine again, willing it to start. Nothing. As he came around to my window again, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. His feet weren't touching the ground. He was floating, hovering an inch or two above the pavement. This couldn't be real. I must have fallen asleep at the wheel. Any moment now, I'd wake up and find myself safely on the highway. But I didn't wake up, and the attendant kept grinning, kept circling. "What do you want?" I shouted through the glass. He stopped, cocking his head to one side like a curious dog. "Company," he said simply. "It gets lonely out here. Please, I beg, just let me go. I won't tell anyone about this place, I swear." His grin faltered for a moment, something like sadness flashing across his face. "I can't," he said. "I'm not in control here. None of us are. Us." I looked around, really looked for the first time, and I saw them. Faint, translucent figures scattered around the station. Some sat in cars, their faces blank and hopeless. Others wandered aimlessly across the lot, their movements slow and dreamlike. All of them trapped, just like me. The attendant placed his hand on my window again, and this time it passed through the glass like it wasn't even there. I recoiled, pressing myself against the far door. "Don't fight it," he said, his arm reaching further into the car. "It's easier if you don't fight." I closed my eyes, waiting for those cold fingers to touch me. But instead, I heard a sound that made my heart leap, the roar of an engine. My eyes flew open. Headlights were approaching fast, a car speeding down the highway. The attendant turned, distracted by the newcomer. In that moment of inattention, I tried my engine one last time. It roared to life. I didn't hesitate. I threw the car into reverse, tires squealing as I backed away from the attendant. He reached for me, his face contorted in anger, but I was already shifting into drive. I sped out of the station, my heart pounding. In my rearview mirror, I saw the other car pull in, its driver oblivious to the danger. I wanted to stop to warn them, but fear kept my foot on the gas. As the station faded into the distance, my phone chimed, signal restored. I pulled over, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's a gas station, I said, my voice trembling, about 20 miles back on Highway 16. Something's wrong there, really wrong. There are people trapped. Sir, slow down, the dispatcher said. What exactly is the nature of the emergency? I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. How could I explain what I'd seen? Who would believe me? I think, I said carefully, that the gas station is taking people, trapping them somehow. There's a man there, the attendant, but he's not normal. And there are others, like ghosts or something. Please, you have to send someone to check it out. There was another car pulling in as I left. They could be in danger. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sir, have you been drinking tonight? No, I swear I'm stone cold sober. I know how this sounds, but please just send someone to check. The dispatcher sighed. All right, sir. We'll send a patrol car to check it out. Can I get your name and number in case we need to follow up? I gave her my information, then ended the call. Part of me wanted to keep driving, to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible, but I couldn't leave, not knowing another person might be trapped there. So I waited, watching the road behind me. After what felt like hours, but was probably only about 30 minutes, I saw flashing lights approaching. A police cruiser sped past me, heading toward the station. I followed at a distance, my headlights off. As I crested a hill, I saw the cruiser's lights illuminating the gas station. My heart sank. It looked normal, no ghostly figures, no floating attendant, just a rundown station on a lonely stretch of highway. I watched as the officer got out of his car and looked around. He went inside, came out a few minutes later, then got back in his cruiser and drove away. I sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been in my head, some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion? But it had felt so real. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I made a decision. I put my car in drive and pulled back onto the highway, heading home. But I made a promise to myself. I would never stop at another gas station at night. And I would warn everyone I knew about the danger lurking on that lonely stretch of road. Because even if no one believed me, even if it had all been some bizarre dream, I knew one thing for certain. Something was very wrong at that gas station, and I was one of the lucky few who had managed to escape. I never should have hiked alone. That's what everyone always says, right? But I've been doing solo hikes for years without a single problem, traversing trails from the Rockies to the Smokies, always finding solace in the rhythm of my boots against the earth. That is, until that day in the Appalachians, when I stumbled upon something I was never meant to see, something that turned my peaceful hike into a nightmare I'd never forget. The morning started like any other on the trail. I woke at dawn, the condensation from my tent dripping onto my sleeping bag, leaving cold, damp patches that made me shiver. The air was crisp, carrying the sharp scent of pine and the rich, loamy aroma of damp earth. I made quick work of breaking camp, eager to get moving and warm up my stiff muscles. My breath puffed out in small clouds as I packed my gear, the forest around me still cloaked in the quiet of early morning. The trail wound through dense forest, the canopy of ancient trees filtering the sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. Occasionally, it opened up to reveal breathtaking vistas of rolling mountains, their peaks shrouded in a delicate mist that glowed in the morning light. By midday, I'd covered a solid 10 miles, my legs burning pleasantly from the exertion, my mind clear and focused, lost in the meditative pace of the hike. That's when I saw it, a small, unmarked path branching off from the main trail, barely noticeable among the tangled undergrowth of ferns and briars. I paused, pulling my well-worn topographic map from my pack, its edges frayed from countless trips. I traced my finger along the familiar lines of the Appalachian Trail, but this turnoff wasn't marked. No faint dotted line, no ranger's note, nothing. Curiosity sparked in my chest, a familiar tug that had led me to some of the best moments of my hiking life, hidden waterfalls tumbling into crystal pools, secret viewpoints that felt like they belonged to me alone. What harm could a little detour do? I had plenty of daylight left. My pack was stocked with food, water, and emergency supplies, and my GPS watch ticked reassuringly on my wrist. Besides, these hidden gems were often the best part of hiking, the rewards for those willing to stray from the beaten path. I adjusted my pack, took a sip from my water bottle, and pushed through the overgrown brush, the branches scratching at my arms as I forged down a narrow path. The going was rougher than the main trail, clearly not maintained by the Park Service. Roots snaked across the ground, threatening to trip me, and low-hanging branches forced me to duck and weave. But the challenge only heightened my sense of adventure, the thrill of exploring somewhere untouched. After about an hour of hiking, the path opened into a small clearing, the trees parting to reveal a patch of open ground bathed in filtered sunlight. I froze at the edge of the tree line, my breath catching in my throat like a stone. There, in the center of the clearing, was a group of people gathered around what looked like a freshly dug hole, the earth around it dark and disturbed. At first, I thought they might be other hikers, maybe a group setting up camp, or even a trail maintenance crew working on some obscure project. But something felt off, a prickling unease that crawled up my spine. They were dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, black jackets, cargo pants, boots caked with mud, and their movements were furtive, hurried, like they were trying not to be seen. I counted 5 of them, 4 men and 1 woman, passing around heavy-looking duffel bags, their voices low and urgent, too soft for me to make out the words. I knew I should leave. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to retrace my steps and pretend I'd never seen this. Everything about the scene radiated danger, the kind of danger you feel in your bones, not just your head. But my feet felt rooted to the spot, my mind struggling to process what I was witnessing. Were they burying something? Hiding it? The hole looked deep, too deep for a casual campfire pit. That's when one of them, tall, broad-shouldered man with a rifle slung across his back, looked up and locked eyes with me. Time seemed to stand still. I saw his eyes widen in surprise, then narrow into a glare that sent ice through my veins, chilling me despite the warmth of the day. His face was hard, weathered, with a scar cutting across one cheek, and his stare held a promise of violence. Without thinking, I turned and ran. My pack bounced against my back, the straps digging into my shoulders as I crashed through the underbrush, no longer caring about stealth. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging welts, and I stumbled over roots, catching myself on my hands, the rough earth scraping my palms. Behind me, I heard shouts, sharp and angry, cutting through the forest. The sound of pursuit spurred me on, heavy footsteps, and the crack of branches as they gave chase. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, each step a battle against the uneven terrain, but adrenaline kept me moving. I had no idea where I was going. In my panic, I'd veered off the narrow path I'd come down, now plunging blindly through the forest with only the vague notion that I needed to find the main trail. The voices behind me grew louder, their words indistinct but filled with menace. They knew these woods better than I did, their steps sure and relentless, gaining ground with every second. Desperation clawed at my throat as I realized I couldn't outrun them forever. I needed to hide. Up ahead, through the blur of trees, I spotted a cluster of large boulders, their moss-covered surfaces jutting out of the earth like ancient sentinels. Without slowing, I made for them, praying for a crevice or overhang where I could conceal myself. As I rounded the largest rock, I saw it, a small opening, just big enough for a person to squeeze through, hidden by a curtain of hanging vines. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself into the gap, the rough stones scraping my arms and knees as I wiggled into the tight space. It opened up slightly inside, a shallow cave just big enough for me to curl up in the darkness, my pack pressed against my chest. I covered my mouth with my hand, trying to muffle the sound of my ragged breathing, the air hot and damp against my palm. Footsteps approached, crunching on leaves and twigs, the sound sharp in the stillness. I held my breath, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it, a drumbeat betraying my hiding place. "Where'd she go?" A gruff voice called out, so close it made my skin crawl. "Spread out," another voice replied, clipped and authoritative. "She can't have gotten far." I could hear them moving around outside my hiding spot, kicking at bushes, snapping branches, their boots scuffing against the forest floor. One of them came so close to the boulder I was hidden behind that I could see the scuffed toe of his boot through the small opening, the leather worn and caked with mud. "Boss ain't gonna be happy if we don't find her," someone muttered, their voice low and tense. "We'll find her," the gruff voice snapped. "No one's getting out of these woods to tell tales. You two head back toward the clearing. Me and Jim will keep searching this way." I stayed frozen in place, my body cramped and aching, long after their voices faded into the distance. The fear of making any sound, any movement that might give me away, kept me rooted there, my muscles screaming in protest. The adrenaline began to wear off, leaving me shaky and nauseous, my stomach churning as I replayed the scene in the clearing. What had I stumbled into? Who were these people, and what were they burying in that hole? Drugs? Weapons? Something worse? The image of that freshly dug earth haunted me, a dark scar in the middle of the forest. As the light began to fade, the forest growing dimmer with the approach of dusk, I knew I couldn't stay in the crevice forever. My legs were numb, my water bottle nearly empty, and the thought of spending the night in this cramped, cold space filled me with dread. But the idea of emerging, of facing the possibility that those men were still out there waiting, was almost worse. I forced myself to take several deep breaths, the air stale and heavy in the confined space, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I needed a plan. First, I had to figure out where I was. In my blind panic, I completely lost my bearings, the forest a maze of identical trees and shadows. I fished my phone out of my pack, my hands trembling as I checked the screen. As I'd feared, there was no signal this deep in the wilderness, the bars stubbornly absent. I cursed under my breath, shoving the phone back into my pack. Okay, I thought, forcing myself to focus. What would an experienced hiker do in this situation? I closed my eyes, trying to visualize the map I'd studied that morning over a cup of instant coffee. The main trail ran roughly north-south through this section of the Appalachians. If I could figure out which direction that was, I might be able to navigate back to it. I dug through my pack, my fingers brushing against granola bars and a spare pair of socks until I found my small compass, its needle glinting faintly in the dim light. Thanking whatever hiking gods were looking out for me, I oriented myself with shaking hands. The main trail should be to the east of my current position, assuming I hadn't veered too far off course. Taking one last deep breath, I slowly eased myself out of the crevice, my muscles protesting as I unfolded my cramped limbs. The forest was eerily silent as I crept through the gathering darkness, every snapping twig making me flinch, certain that at any moment I'd hear shouts of discovery. I moved as quietly as I could, my eyes straining in the dim light to avoid tripping over roots or rocks. The trees all looked the same in the twilight, their shapes looming like silent watchers, and more than once I wondered if I was going in circles, the forest playing tricks on my exhausted mind. Doubt began to creep in. What if I was heading in the wrong direction? What if I never found my way out of these woods? Just as despair threatened to overwhelm me, I saw it, a strip of reflective marker, the kind used to mark official trails, glowing faintly in the beam of my headlamp. My heart leaped, a surge of hope giving me a second wind. I quickened my pace, careful but urgent, until I could make out the well-worn path of the main trail. I wanted to cry with relief, my knees weak with the sudden release of tension, but I knew I wasn't safe yet. Those men could still be out there searching for me, their rifles ready. I needed to put as much distance between myself and that clearing as possible. I hiked through the night, jumping at every rustle of leaves, every distant snap of a branch, glancing constantly over my shoulder. The forest felt alive with menace, every shadow hiding a potential threat. When the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, I finally allowed myself to stop and rest. I found a sheltered spot off the trail, a small hollow beneath an overhang of rock, and sank to the ground, my legs trembling with exhaustion. I pulled my knees to my chest, my pack still strapped to my back, and let the events of the previous day crash over me like a wave. What was I going to do? Should I report what I'd seen to the authorities? But I had no proof, no clear description of the people or what they were doing, just a fleeting glimpse of a hole and some bags. The thought of those men finding out I'd talked, tracking me down, made my blood run cold. In the end, I decided to hike out to the trailhead and drive straight home. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even as I reached my car and locked the doors, the familiar weight of my keys grounding me. Even days later, safe in my apartment, I kept replaying the scene in the clearing over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of it. The glint of the rifle, the scarred man's piercing stare, the urgency of their movements. It all felt like a puzzle I couldn't solve. I never went back to those mountains, the Appalachians now tainted by that memory. I never told anyone the full story of what happened that day, afraid they think I was crazy, or worse, that word would somehow get back to those people in the clearing. But sometimes, when I'm lying awake at night, I find myself wondering about that hidden clearing and the secrets buried there. What were they hiding? Who were they? And I thank my lucky stars that I made it out of those woods alive. The experience changed me. I'm more cautious now, more aware of the potential dangers lurking in even the most beautiful places. I still hike. I can't give up the trails entirely, the call of the wilderness too strong, but I stick to well-traveled paths, my map always double-checked, my senses heightened. If you're ever out in the wilderness and come across a path that's not on your map, think twice before you take it. Sometimes it's better to stick to the known trails, because you never know what you might find, or what might find you in the depths of the forest. The smell of rotting newspapers was my first clue that something was terribly wrong. I stood on Mrs. Abney's porch, staring at the yellowing pile of untouched dailies stacked haphazardly by her front door, my stomach twisting with a dread I couldn't quite explain. In our quiet suburban neighborhood, where every lawn was meticulously manicured and gossip spread faster than wildfire, Mrs. Abney's absence was like a glaring void in the fabric of our community. I've been watching her house for days, noting the gradually accumulating papers, the darkened windows, and the eerie stillness that seemed to emanate from the property. At first, I chalked it up to a spontaneous vacation or a visit to her daughter in Florida, a trip she'd mentioned in passing during one of our chats over the garden fence. But as the days stretched on and the papers piled up, that nagging feeling in my gut grew impossible to ignore, like a splinter I couldn't pull out. Taking a deep breath, I raised my hand to knock on the faded blue door, its paint peeling in thin, curling strips. The sound echoed hollowly, unanswered, swallowed by the oppressive quiet of the house. I tried again, louder this time, my knuckles rapping sharply against the wood. "Mrs. Abney, it's Sarah from next door. Are you all right?" I called, my voice steady but tinged with worry. Silence. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, my sneakers scuffing against the worn welcome mat, debating my next move. It felt invasive to try the door, a violation of the unspoken rules of neighborly courtesy, but the worry gnawing at me overrode my hesitation. I reached for the handle, half expecting it to be locked, my heart thudding in my chest. It wasn't. The door swung open with an ominous creak, revealing a slice of the dim interior, and a musty smell of neglect wafted out, mingling with something else, something sickly sweet that made my nose wrinkle and my stomach lurch. "Mrs. Abney?" I called again, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the stillness, barely carrying past the threshold. I stepped inside, my eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom, the air heavy with the scent of dust and decay. The house was a time capsule of 1970s decor, avocado green wallpaper, heavy wooden furniture, and shag carpeting that muffled my footsteps. But there was something off about it now, a sense of wrongness that clung to the air. A fine layer of dust coated every surface, from the mahogany coffee table to the porcelain figurines on the mantel, and the air felt thick, stagnant, like the house itself was holding its breath. Moving further into the living room, I noticed little signs of disruption. A brass lamp knocked over on an end table, its shade askew. A framed photo of Mrs. Abney's late husband lying face down on the carpet, the glass cracked in a spiderweb pattern. It was as if a struggle had taken place, but someone had half-heartedly tried to put everything back into place, leaving the scene just slightly off-kilter. My heart was pounding now, a steady drumbeat that echoed in my ears, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and leave, to call someone, anyone, and let them handle this. But I couldn't, not until I knew Mrs. Abney was okay. She'd always been kind to me, sharing her homemade jam and stories of her youth, her eyes crinkling with warmth as she laughed. The thought of her hurt or in trouble kept me moving forward. I made my way toward the kitchen, calling out periodically, my voice growing shakier with each unanswered call. Each room I passed was empty, showing the same signs of subtle disarray. A curtain pulled slightly askew, a chair pushed out from the dining table at an odd angle. In the kitchen, dirty dishes filled the sink, their surfaces crusted with dried food, and a half-empty cup of tea sat on the counter, a thin layer of mold floating on its surface, the faint aroma of chamomile now sour and cloying. The sickly sweet smell was stronger here, making my throat tighten. That's when I heard it, a soft thump from upstairs, so faint I almost thought I'd imagined it, like a book slipping off a shelf. "Hello," I called, my voice cracking, the word barely audible over the pounding of my pulse. "Is someone there?" Another thump, louder this time, deliberate, coming from the direction of the staircase. It was definitely not my imagination. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, every muscle in my body tense, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Part of me wanted to run, to bolt out the front door and call the police, letting them deal with whatever was going on. But what if Mrs. Abney was up there, hurt, unable to call for help? The image of her lying on the floor, frail and alone, pushed me forward. Swallowing hard, I began to climb the stairs, each step creaking under my weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent house, like a warning to whatever or whoever was waiting. As I reached the landing, the sickly sweet smell grew overwhelming, a heavy, cloying presence that made me gag, my hand instinctively rising to cover my nose. "Mrs. Abney?" I tried again, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling with fear. The upstairs hallway stretched before me, four closed doors lining its length, their dark wood panels looming in the dim light filtering through a small window at the end of the hall. Which one had the sound come from? As if in answer, another thump sounded from behind the door at the far end, Mrs. Abney's bedroom, where she'd shown me her collection of vintage quilts during a neighborly visit years ago. I approached slowly, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob, the brass cold against my palm. The smell was unbearable now, thick and suffocating, and I had to fight the urge to turn and run. I turned the knob, pushing the door open inch by inch, the hinges groaning in protest. The room was dark, heavy curtains drawn across the windows, blocking out the afternoon sun. Even in the dim light, I could make out a shape on the bed, a figure lying motionless under a mound of blankets, the familiar patchwork quilt Mrs. Abney cherished draped over it. "Mrs. Abney?" I whispered, taking a tentative step into the room, my sneakers sinking into the plush carpet. The figure didn't move, didn't respond, but another thump sounded from under the bed, sharp and unmistakable. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. If Mrs. Abney was on the bed, then what was making that noise? Slowly dreading what I might see, I crouched down, my knees creaking, and lifted the edge of the bedspread, the fabric soft but dusty in my fingers. Two eyes gleamed back at me in the darkness, glowing with reflected light, and I stumbled backward with a strangled cry, my back hitting the wall with a thud. It wasn't a monster or an intruder. It was Mittens, Mrs. Abney's ancient tabby cat, his fur matted, and his eyes wide with fear or hunger. Relief flooded through me, making my knees weak. my breath coming in short, shaky gasps. "Just the cat," I muttered to myself, pressing a hand to my chest to calm my racing heart. Everything was fine, except it wasn't. Now that my eyes had adjusted to the gloom, I could see the figure on the bed more clearly. The blankets weren't rising and falling with breath. The sickly sweet smell, now unmistakable, was the stench of death. I backed away, my hand clamped over my mouth to stifle a scream, my mind reeling. I had to get out of there, had to call the police, but as I turned to flee, something caught my eye, a glint of metal on the nightstand. It was a key, small and silver, gleaming faintly in the dim light. I recognized it immediately, the spare key to Mrs. Abney's house, the one she'd given me years ago for emergencies, insisting I keep it in case she ever locked herself out. I hadn't used it to get in today. The front door had been unlocked, which meant someone else had been here, someone who had access to her key. A floorboard creaked behind me, sharp and deliberate, and I whirled around, my heart in my throat. There, silhouetted in the doorway, stood a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, definitely not Mrs. Abney. The dim light from the hallway cast his face in shadow, but I knew who it was before he spoke. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out, though my gut already knew the answer. It was Tommy, Mrs. Abney's good-for-nothing grandson, the one she was always complaining about, the one she kept bailing out with money despite her better judgment, her voice heavy with disappointment as she recounted his latest troubles. "Didn't expect to see you here, Sarah," he said, his voice eerily calm, smooth like oil over water. He stepped into the room, his boots thudding softly on the carpet. "Guess you were always a nosy one, weren't you?" I edged toward the window, my mind racing, my palms sweaty against the wall behind me. "Tommy, what happened? What did you do?" My voice trembled, but I forced the words out, needing to know, even as fear clawed at my chest. He laughed, a hollow sound that sent chills down my spine, his silhouette looming larger as he took another step closer. "What did I do? I finally got what was owed to me. The old bat was going to change her will. Cut me out entirely. Couldn't let that happen, could I?" My back hit the wall, the cold plaster grounding me even as panic surged. There was nowhere left to go. The window too high to jump from, the room closing in around me. Tommy took another step, and I saw something glint in his hand, a knife, its blade catching the faint light, wickedly sharp. "Now," he said, almost conversationally, his tone chilling in its casualness. "What am I going to do with you?" Time seemed to slow, my heartbeat thundering in my ears, drowning out everything else. I saw his grip tighten on the knife, saw him start to move toward me, his shadow stretching across the room. And then I saw my chance. With a desperate lunge, I grabbed the heavy brass lamp from the bedside table, its weight solid in my hands, and hurled it at him. It caught him square in the face, the base connecting with a sickening crunch. He stumbled backward with a howl of pain, the knife clattering to the floor as he clutched his nose, blood seeping between his fingers. I didn't wait to see if he'd fall. I ran, shoving past him, my shoulder grazing his as I bolted for the stairs, my feet pounding on the creaking steps. I could hear him behind me, cursing and stumbling, his heavy footsteps shaking the old house. I reached the front door, yanking it open with such force it slammed against the wall, and burst out into the blinding sunlight, the warmth of the day a stark contrast to the cold horror inside. I didn't stop running until I reached my own house next door, my hand shaking so badly I fumbled the key twice before unlocking the door. I slammed it shut behind me, sliding the deadbolt into place, and collapsed against it, gasping for breath. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone from my pocket and dialed 911, my voice breaking as I gasped out what had happened, the words tumbling over each other between sobs. The next few hours passed in a blur of flashing lights and chaos. Police cars and ambulances filled the street, their sirens cutting through the usual suburban calm. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, whispering and pointing, their faces a mix of shock and curiosity. I answered questions until my throat was dry, repeating the story over and over until it felt like a script, each retelling draining me further. They caught Tommy trying to flee town, his beat-up sedan pulled over on the highway, Mrs. Abney's jewelry and a wad of cash stashed in a duffel bag in his trunk. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, the key, the blood on his clothes, the knife with his fingerprints, he confessed to everything, his voice flat and unrepentant as he admitted to killing his grandmother to secure his inheritance. Even as justice was served, I couldn't shake the weight of guilt pressing down on me. If I'd checked on Mrs. Abney sooner, could I have saved her? Would she still be alive if I'd been a more attentive neighbor? Noticed the papers piling up a day earlier, knocked on her door before Tommy had a chance to act? In the days that followed, as life in our little suburb tried to return to normal, the manicured lawns and friendly waves seemed like a facade. I found myself unable to look at my neighbors the same way, wondering what secrets hid behind their closed doors, what darkness lurked beneath their perfect exteriors. Being a good neighbor, I realized, sometimes meant being brave enough to open those doors, to face the truth no matter how horrifying. But as I lay awake at night, the image of Mrs. Abney's lifeless form burned into my mind. I knew one thing for certain. I never walked past a pile of newspapers on a porch the same way again. The moment I stepped into my grandparents' old farmhouse, I knew something was off. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain, like the static before a storm. I brushed it off as nerves. After all, this was supposed to be my fresh start, a chance to leave behind the chaos of my old life. I just never imagined it would turn into my worst nightmare, a descent into something I couldn't rationalize or escape. I'd inherited the place after Granddad passed away, the last of my grandparents to go. The farmhouse had been sitting empty for months, a lonely sentinel at the end of a long, rutted dirt road, surrounded by fields of tall grass that swayed in the wind. The lawyer had suggested selling it, rattling off figures about market value, but I saw an opportunity. My dead-end job in the city, my suffocating apartment, the sting of my messy breakup, they'd all been weighing me down, suffocating me. This farmhouse, with its wide-open spaces and quiet solitude, felt like a chance to breathe, to heal, to rebuild. So I packed up my life and moved in, determined to make the place my own. The first few days were a flurry of activity, the kind that keeps your mind too busy to dwell on unease. I threw open the windows, letting fresh air and sunlight pour into the dusty rooms, banishing the musty smell of neglect. I scrubbed the wide plank floors until they gleamed, dusted shelves lined with my grandparents' old knickknacks, porcelain figurines, faded books, a chipped teacup Grandma used to sip from during our visits. Slowly, the house began to feel like mine, the creaks and groans of the old structure becoming familiar, almost comforting. But even as I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a prickle at the back of my neck that made me glance over my shoulder more than once. It started small, a creak on the stairs when I was alone in the kitchen, a shadow in the corner of my eye that vanished when I turned to look. I chalked it up to the house settling, to my imagination running wild in the quiet countryside, so different from the constant noise of the city. But then things escalated, and the rational explanations started to crumble. One morning, I came downstairs to find all the kitchen cabinets wide open, their contents exposed like a wound. I stood there, coffee mug in hand, staring at the gaping doors, a chill creeping up my spine. I knew I'd closed them the night before. I was meticulous about it, a habit from years of living in cramped apartments where order kept chaos at bay. My heart thudded as I walked over, the floorboards creaking under my bare feet, and shut each cabinet, the hinges squeaking in protest. "Get it together, Sarah," I muttered, shaking my head, trying to laugh it off. I must have been more tired than I thought, distracted by the move, maybe even sleepwalking. I pushed the incident to the back of my mind and went about my day, hauling boxes from the attic to sort through, determined to ignore the unease gnawing at me. A few days later, I was in the attic, surrounded by boxes of my grandparents' belongings, the air thick with dust that danced in the weak sunlight filtering through a grimy window. I was leafing through a stack of black and white photos, faded images of family picnics, my grandparents young and smiling, their arms around each other. The nostalgia was bittersweet, a reminder of simpler times. As I sifted through the pile, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, impossible since the window was closed tight. Photos scattered across the floor, fluttering like leaves, and the attic door slammed shut with a bang that made me jump, my heart lurching into my throat. I scrambled to gather the photos, my hands shaking, and that's when I saw it, a picture I didn't recognize. It showed the farmhouse, its familiar wraparound porch and gabled roof, but something was wrong. Dark figures stood in the windows, their faces blurred and indistinct, like smudges of ink. I blinked, my breath catching, and when I looked again, the photo was normal. Just the house, no figures, the windows 26.4E6F5B3D4 8F6C3C7-0E7F9 beat figures. I told myself it was a trick of the light, my tired eyes playing tricks, but as I made my way downstairs, the photo clutched in my trembling hand. The feeling of being watched intensified, a weight pressing down on me. That night, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, each step a measured thud against the wooden floor. They paused outside my bedroom door, and I lay frozen in bed, barely breathing, my pulse hammering in my ears. The doorknob began to turn, a slow, agonizing twist of metal, and I held my breath, waiting for the door to swing open. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped, the footsteps retreating, fading into silence down hall. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, sitting up with the bedside lamp on, clutching the quilt to my chest, every creak of the house making me flinch. By morning, I was a wreck, my eyes gritty with exhaustion, but I convinced myself it was just the house, just my nerves. I called my best friend, Kate, needing to hear a familiar voice. "I think I'm going crazy," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady as I paced the living room, the phone pressed to my ear. "There's something wrong with this house. It's a big change, moving to the country like that," Kate said, her voice soothing, warm like the cups of tea we used to share. "You're probably just not used to all the quiet. Why don't I come visit this weekend? We can have a girls' night, watch some movies. It'll help you relax." I agreed, grateful for the company, the promise of her laughter and no-nonsense attitude grounding me. But as the days ticked by until Kate's arrival, things only got worse. I'd wake to find objects moved. A book on the coffee table when I'd left it on a shelf. My car keys in the fridge instead of the hook by the door. Their metal cold against my fingers when I found them. One morning, I came downstairs to find all the photos on the mantel turned face down, their wooden frames clattering softly as I righted them, my hands trembling. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was sleepwalking, moving things without realizing it. The stress of the move messing with my head. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The house felt alive, watching, waiting, its presence a constant pressure against my skin. The night before Kate was due to arrive, I was in the shower, the hot water steaming up the glass door, when a light suddenly went out, plunging me into darkness. I stood there, the water turning cold, my heart pounding as the room grew eerily silent. Then slowly, I saw a shape form in the steamed-up glass, handprint, too large to be my own, sliding down the surface with a faint squeak. I bolted from the bathroom, wrapping myself in a towel, my wet feet slipping on the hardwood as I ran to my bedroom. I slammed the door shut and wedged a chair under the handle, my whole body shaking, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The handprint lingered in my mind, its edges too defined, too deliberate to be a trick of the steam. When Kate arrived the next day, I was a mess, dark circles under my eyes, jumping at every sound, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. She took one look at me, her smile fading as she set her bag down in the entryway. "Sarah, what's going on? You look terrible," she said, her brow furrowing with concern. I broke down then, the words spilling out as I told her everything. The noises, the moved objects, the photo in the attic, the handprint in the shower. To her credit, Kate listened without interrupting, her face growing more concerned with each word, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When I finished, she leaned forward, her voice steady. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We'll stay here tonight together. If anything weird happens, we'll both see it, and if it does, we'll leave first thing in the morning and figure out what to do next." "Deal." I nodded, relieved to have someone else there, someone who believed me, her presence like an anchor in the storm of my fear. That night, we made dinner, pasta with sauce from a jar, the kitchen filled with the comforting smell of garlic and tomatoes, and watched a movie, trying to keep things light. But there was an undercurrent of tension, both of us jumping slightly at every creak and groan of the old house, the laughter forced and brittle. We were just getting ready for bed, brushing our teeth side by side in the bathroom, when we heard it, a loud crash from downstairs, like a stack of dishes hitting the floor. Kate and I looked at each other, eyes wide, the toothbrush frozen in my hand. "Stay here," she whispered, grabbing a tennis racket from her bag, her knuckles white around the handle. "I'll go check it out." "No," I hissed, grabbing her arm, my fingers digging into her skin. "We should stick together." Slowly, hearts pounding, We made our way downstairs, the racket raised like a weapon, my flashlight casting long shadows across the walls. The crash had come from the kitchen. As we approached, I could see shards of glass glittering on the floor in the moonlight streaming through the window, the jagged edges catching the light like tiny stars. Kate flipped on the light switch, and we both gasped. Every dish, every glass, every piece of crockery was shattered on the floor, a chaotic mosaic of broken porcelain. And there, scrawled on the wall in what looked horribly like blood, the letters dripping and uneven, were the words, "Get out." Kate turned to me, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "We're leaving now," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in it. We ran upstairs, throwing our belongings into bags, the air thick with panic. I could hear noises all around us now, banging on the walls, scratching sounds like nails on wood, a low, inhuman moan that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As we raced for the front door, a family portrait on the wall began to shake, its frame rattling against the plaster. It flew off, narrowly missing Kate's head, and she screamed, the sound raw and terrified. We burst out of the house into the cool night air, the grass wet with dew under our feet, and didn't stop running until we reached Kate's car. She fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking, as I glanced back at the house. There, in the upstairs window, I saw a figure, dark, indistinct, but undeniably there, its presence heavy with malice, watching us. Kate finally got the car started, and we peeled out of the driveway, the tires kicking up gravel, neither of us speaking for a long time, the only sound the roar of the engine as we put miles between us and the farmhouse. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to break, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges, Kate spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "What are you going to do?" I shook my head, still trying to process everything that had happened, my hands still trembling in my lap. "I don't know. I can't go back there, but I can't just ignore it either. What if someone else buys the house? They could be in danger." We decided to go to the local historical society, figuring if something had happened in that house, there might be a record of it, some clue to explain the terror we'd experienced. It took some digging, flipping through dusty ledgers and microfiche in a cramped, musty room, but we found something, a newspaper article from the 1920s, yellowed and brittle. The farmhouse had belonged to the Anderson family. One night, the father had gone mad, killing his wife and 2 children with a shotgun before turning it on himself. The tragedy splashed across the headlines in stark black ink. The article was vague on the details, but one line stood out, chilling in its simplicity. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises from the house for weeks before the tragedy. It all made sense now. The feeling of being watched, the moved objects, the writing on the wall. The spirits of the Anderson family were still there, trapped in the house where they died, their pain and anger lingering like a stain. I couldn't bring myself to sell the house. Knowing what I knew, the thought of another family moving in and facing that horror unbearable. Instead, I contacted a medium, a woman named Eleanor who specialized in cleansing haunted properties, her voice calm and confident over the phone. It took time, several visits, rituals with sage and salt, prayers whispered in the dim light of the farmhouse, and there were moments when I wasn't sure it would work, when the air still felt heavy with unseen eyes. But slowly, the presence in the house began to fade, the oppressive weight lifting like a fog burning off in the morning sun. I never lived in the farmhouse again, the memories too raw, the shadows too long. But I visit sometimes, driving down that dirt road to leave flowers for the family that never found peace in life. A bouquet of daisies and lavender, their scent sweet against the weathered porch. The house stands quiet now, its dark history known only to me, the windows reflecting the sky without a hint of those blurred figures. Sometimes when I drive by at night, I think I see a figure in the upstairs window, a fleeting shape that vanishes when I blink. But it's gone, just an old house with old memories, and maybe, just maybe, a few restless spirits finally at peace. The moment the lights went out, I knew we were in trouble. One second, the TV was blaring some mindless reality show, the contestants' voices a familiar hum in the background, and the next, we were plunged into total darkness, the screen going black with a faint pop. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the howling wind outside, rattling the windows, and the startled gasps of my family. "Dad!" My daughter Emily's voice quavered from somewhere to my left, small and frightened in the pitch-black living room. What's happening? I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy as I activated its faint glow, casting a weak circle of light across the room. My wife, Sarah, was already moving, her silhouette outlined against the window as she peered through the blinds, her posture tense. "Looks like the whole street's out," she reported, her voice tight with concern, the words clipped as she scanned the darkened neighborhood. "Must be the storm." As if on cue, a crack of thunder shook the house, the sound reverberating through the walls, making us all jump. I saw my son Tommy clutch his stuffed dinosaur tighter, his small hands trembling as he pressed it against his chest, his eyes wide in the dim light. "It's okay, guys," I said, trying to inject some confidence into my voice, though my own heart was starting to race. "Just a power outage. I'll go check the breaker box and grab some flashlights." "Sit tight." I made my way to the kitchen, using my phone's flashlight to navigate the familiar layout of our home, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. As I rummaged through drawers, searching for our emergency supplies, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the darkness or the storm's fury outside. There was a heaviness in the air, a tension that set my nerves on edge, like the moment before a predator strikes. I found the flashlights and a pack of batteries, their weight reassuring in my hands, then headed to the garage to check the breaker box, my footsteps echoing in the silent house. As I passed the front door, a movement outside caught my eye, a flicker in the corner of my vision. I froze, peering through the small window, set into the door, my breath fogging the glass. For a moment, I saw nothing but rain and darkness, the storm lashing the street in sheets of water. Then a flash of lightning illuminated the yard, and my blood ran cold. There was a figure standing at the edge of our property, barely visible through the downpour, tall and motionless, its head turned toward the house. It was too far to make out details, but its stillness was unnatural, like a statue planted in the grass. I blinked, and in the next flash of lightning, it was gone, the yard empty again. My heart racing, I shook my head, telling myself it was just a trick of the storm, a shadow cast by the swaying trees. I hurried back to the living room, my hands gripping the flashlights tightly. "Okay, got the flashlights," I announced, passing them out to Sarah, Emily, and Tommy, their faces pale in the dim glow. "Breakers are fine, so it must be a neighborhood-wide issue." Sarah looked at me sharply, picking up on the tension in my voice, her eyes narrowing as she studied my face. "Everything okay, hon?" she asked, her tone cautious, sensing there was more I wasn't saying. I hesitated, not wanting to scare the kids, their small forms huddled on the couch, Emily's braids swinging as she clutched her flashlight. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just keep away from the windows, okay? Storm's pretty bad out there." She nodded, understanding passing between us, a silent acknowledgement that something was wrong, though neither of us could name it. We settled in the living room, the warm glow of the flashlights creating a small circle of comfort in the darkness, a fragile barrier against the storm's rage. I tried to keep the kids distracted with stories and games, pulling out a deck of cards and starting a half-hearted round of Go Fish, but I couldn't stop my eyes from darting to the windows every few seconds, expecting to see that figure again. An hour passed, then two, the storm showing no signs of letting up, the wind howling like a living thing, the rain hammering the roof. The kids were getting restless, Emily fidgeting with her flashlight, Tommy's dinosaur now abandoned on the couch as he whined about being bored. Sarah's forehead was creased with worry, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater, a nervous habit I hadn't seen since the early days of our marriage. That's when we heard it, a soft scratching at the front door, so faint I thought I might have imagined it, like nails brushing against wood. But then it came again, louder, more insistent, a deliberate scrape that cut through the storm's noise. Sarah's eyes met mine, wide with fear, her lips parting slightly. The kids fell silent, their flashlights forgotten, sensing the sudden tension in the room. "Dad," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible. "Is someone out there?" Before I could answer, the scratching turned into a knock, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the silent house, each one like a hammer against my nerves. I stood up slowly, my mind racing. It could be a neighbor checking on us, or someone stranded in the storm, seeking shelter. But the pit in my stomach told me it was neither of those things, that whatever was outside wasn't looking for help. "Stay here," I murmured to my family, picking up the heavy flashlight, its metal casing cold and solid in my hand. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. I approached the door cautiously, my heart pounding so loud I was sure whoever or whatever was out there could hear it. The knocking came again, more insistent, the door rattling in its frame. Taking a deep breath, I called out, "Who's there?" My voice sounded steadier than I felt, though it wavered slightly at the end. Silence, thick and oppressive, stretched for a moment. Then a voice low and gravelly answered, "Please, I need help. My car broke down. Can I use your phone?" The words were polite, but there was something off about them, a hollow quality that made my skin crawl. Every instinct I had screamed danger. I glanced back at Sarah, saw her shaking her head vehemently, her eyes pleading with me not to open the door. "I'm sorry," I called back, gripping the flashlight tighter, "but we can't open the door. The storm's too dangerous. I can call someone for you if you'd like." A pause, then the voice came again, no longer pleading. "No, that's all right. I just need to come in for a moment." "Won't you open the door?" The tone had changed, any pretense of friendliness gone, replaced by a cold, demanding edge that sent a shiver down my spine. I backed away from the door, my grip tightening on the flashlight. "I'm calling the police," I said loudly, hoping my voice didn't betray the fear clawing at my chest. A chuckle came from the other side of the door, a sound that sent chills racing across my skin, low and menacing, like it knew something I didn't. "No, you're not," the voice said, dripping with certainty. "Your phones won't work. No one's coming to help you." As if to prove his point, I heard a sharp crack from the living room. Sarah gasped, and I turned to see her staring at her phone in disbelief. The screen shattered, sparks dancing across its surface like tiny fireflies. It was impossible. All our phones couldn't just die at once, their screens intact just moments ago. The knocking turned into pounding, the door shuddering under the assault, the wood creaking ominously. "Let me in," the voice roared, all pretense abandoned, its tone guttural and human. "Let me in now." "Kids upstairs," I shouted, rushing back to Sarah, my voice sharp with panic. "Barricade yourselves in our bedroom, go." They scrambled up the stairs, Emily's sobs echoing in the hallway, Tommy's small hand clutching hers as Sarah ushered them along. I could hear their footsteps pounding above, the sound of a door slamming shut. There was no time for comfort now. I ran to the kitchen, my socks slipping on the tile, and grabbed the biggest knife I could find, a chef's knife with a gleaming 8-inch blade. The pounding at the door was relentless, punctuated by growls and snarls that didn't sound human, each one sending a jolt of terror through me. Sarah reappeared at my side, clutching a golf club from the hall closet, her face pale, but her jaw set with determination, her eyes fierce despite the fear in them. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the cacophony at the door. Before I could answer, there was a tremendous crash, the sound of splintering wood as the front door burst open, torn from its hinges like it was made of paper. In the beam of my flashlight, I caught a glimpse of our attacker, and my heart nearly stopped. It was the figure I'd seen in the yard, but up close, it was clear this was no human. Its skin was pale and mottled, stretched tight over an emaciated frame, like a corpse left too long in the sun. Its eyes glowed an unnatural yellow in the darkness, fixed on us with predatory intensity, unblinking and wild. It lunged forward with impossible speed, a blur of motion that made my stomach drop. I swung the knife, feeling it connect with flesh, the blade sinking into its arm, but the creature didn't even flinch, didn't slow. It backhanded me, the force sending me flying across the room, my body slamming into the wall with a thud that drove the air from my lungs. Through blurred vision, I saw Sarah swing the golf club, her arms trembling with effort. It connected with the creature's head with a sickening crunch, the sound echoing in the room, but again, it seemed unfazed, its head snapping back only to fix those glowing eyes on her. It grabbed the club, wrenching it from her grasp with a snarl and snapping it like a twig, the metal shaft bending in its hands. I struggled to my feet, my head spinning, desperate to help her, but my limbs felt slow, clumsy, like I was moving through water. The creature had Sarah by the throat now, lifting her off the ground, her feet dangling as she clawed at its arm, her nails leaving red welts that didn't seem to register. "No!" I screamed, throwing myself at the monster, my body crashing into its side. We went down in a tangle of limbs, rolling across the floor, the knife skittering out of reach. Its strength was incredible and human, like wrestling a machine made of bone and sinew. I fought with everything I had, punching, kicking, my hands scrabbling for anything to use as a weapon, but it was like trying to stop a freight train. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the chaos, a high-pitched wail, piercing and insistent, filling the house with its shrill cry. The smoke alarm. The creature recoiled, shrieking in pain, its hands clawing at its ears, momentarily forgetting about us. I didn't waste the opportunity. I grabbed Sarah's hand, her fingers cold and trembling in mine, and we ran for the stairs, our footsteps pounding as we raced to the bedroom. We found the kids huddled inside, tears streaming down their faces, Emily clutching Tommy as they crouched by the bed. The smoke alarm was still blaring, its sound deafening, and I realized what had happened. In their panic, they must have set it off, maybe knocking over a candle we lit for light. Fire escape. I gasped, pointing to the window, my voice hoarse. No. We scrambled onto the small balcony, the cold rain a shock against our skin, the metal railing slick under our hands. The creature's enraged howls echoed from below, growing closer as it recovered. We descended the fire escape as fast as we could, the metal steps clanging under our weight, the rain making each step treacherous. As our feet hit the ground, I saw lights in the distance, red and blue, flashing through the storm, getting closer. Police. Someone must have heard the commotion, maybe a neighbor alerted by the crash of the door, and called them. We ran toward the lights, our clothes soaked, our breaths coming in ragged gasps, not daring to look back. As we reached the police cars, I finally chanced a glance over my shoulder. Our house stood dark and silent, the front door a gaping wound in its facade, but there was no sign of the creature, no glowing eyes in the shadows. The next few hours passed in a blur of questions and disbelief, the police station a sterile contrast to the chaos we'd escaped. The officers found no trace of an intruder, just our battered front door as evidence that something had happened. They chalked it up to storm damage and an overactive imagination fueled by fear, their voices gentle but skeptical as they took our statements. But we knew the truth, Sarah and I exchanging a look as we sat in the hospital waiting room, being checked for injuries, the kids asleep against us, exhausted from the ordeal. As we sat there, wrapped in scratchy hospital blankets, I caught Sarah's eye. We didn't need to speak, the weight of what we'd experienced passing between us in silence. We both knew our lives had changed forever, that we'd glimpsed something beyond comprehension, something that didn't care about locked doors or safe neighborhoods. As the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, painting the sky in hues of gold and gray, I held my family close, grateful that we had survived. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that somewhere out there in the shadows, it was waiting, biding its time. And next time, we might not be so lucky. The first time I noticed the black SUV in my rearview mirror, I thought nothing of it, just another vehicle sharing the long stretch of highway. 3 hours later, as it still tailed me down the empty road, its dark shape a constant presence in the distance, I realized this was no coincidence. This was the beginning of the most terrifying night of my life, a relentless pursuit that would unravel secrets I'd buried deep. I'd set out early that morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, painting the Arizona desert in hues of pink and gold as I pulled out of my driveway in Phoenix. The long drive to Dallas stretched ahead of me, a solo road trip I'd been looking forward to for weeks. The open road, music blaring through the speakers, windows down to let the warm desert air rush in. It was supposed to be liberating, a chance to clear my head after months of stress. The first few hours flew by in a blur of sandy vistas, cacti silhouetted against the sky, and cheesy road trip songs, my voice belting out off-key lyrics to keep myself awake. I stopped for gas around noon at a small, dusty station off the interstate, stretching my legs and grabbing a bag of chips and a soda from the convenience store, the bell above the door jingling as I stepped back into the heat. That's when I first noticed this SUV, black, nondescript, with tinted windows so dark I couldn't see the driver. I pulled in as I was filling up my tank, parking at a pump on the opposite side of the lot, its engine idling softly. I didn't think much of it at the time. Plenty of people were probably making the same drive, heading east toward Texas or beyond. I paid for my gas, hopped back in my car, and hit the road again, the station shrinking in my rearview mirror as I merged onto the highway. It wasn't until about an hour later, as the desert stretched endlessly around me, that I realized the SUV was still behind me. It maintained the same distance, never passing me or falling too far back, a constant shadow in my mirror. A knot of unease began to form in my stomach, tightening with every mile that ticked by on the odometer. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. I've been listening to too many true crime podcasts, my imagination spinning tales of danger where there was none. To prove it to myself, I decided to take the next exit, a small off-ramp leading to a gas station and a cluster of fast food joints. Surely, the SUV would continue on its way, heading to wherever it was going. My heart sank as I watched the SUV's blinker flash in my mirror, following me off the highway, its tires crunching on the gravel as it exited behind me. Okay, I thought, gripping the steering wheel, my palms starting to sweat. This is fine. They probably just need to stop too. I'll go to the gas station, and they'll go on their way. But they didn't. As I pulled into the gas station, the SUV followed, parking a few spaces away, its tinted windows staring at me like blank eyes. I sat in my car, hands still on the wheel, watching in my side mirror as the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark sunglasses despite the overcast sky, his black jacket and jeans blending into the vehicle behind him. He stood there for a moment, seeming to look right at me, his head tilted slightly, before walking into the gas station, his gait slow and deliberate. My mind raced, my pulse quickening. This couldn't be a coincidence anymore. Why was he following me? What did he want? I didn't wait to find out. The second he disappeared into the store, I started my car and peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing against the asphalt, my hands shaking as I merged back onto the highway. For a blissful few minutes, the road behind me was clear, the SUV nowhere in sight. I started to relax, my shoulders loosening, my breath steadying as I turned up the radio, trying to drown out the lingering fear. Maybe I'd overreacted, seen a threat where there was none. Then I saw it, the black SUV, gaining on me fast, its sleek shape cutting through the desert haze like a shark through water. Panic set in, sharp and cold, flooding my veins. I pressed harder on the accelerator, my little sedan lurching forward, weaving between a few other cars on the road, their drivers oblivious to my desperation. But the SUV kept pace, always there in my mirror, never more than a few car lengths behind, its presence relentless, unyielding. I tried to think logically through the fear clawing at my chest. I needed to get help, to find somewhere safe. I fumbled for my phone, cursing under my breath as I glanced at the screen. No signal, just a mocking no-service message. Of course, miles of empty desert in every direction meant no cell towers, no lifeline. The SUV was closer now, close enough that I could see the outline of the driver, still wearing those dark sunglasses, his face expressionless as he stared straight ahead, hands steady on the wheel. My heart pounded, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I had to get off this highway, find somewhere with people, safety in numbers, right? The next exit sign appeared, advertising a small town 5 miles ahead, but on a map called Redstone with a diner and a motel. It was my only chance. I took the exit ramp faster than I should have, my car swaying dangerously as I fought to keep control, the tires screeching against the pavement. The SUV followed, closer than ever, its grille looming in my mirror as the road narrowed into a 2-lane street lined with faded storefronts. It pulled up right behind me, so close I couldn't even see its headlights, the vehicle a hulking presence that seemed to swallow the road. The town, when it appeared, was little more than a cluster of buildings around a main street, the kind of place where the gas station doubles as the post office. At this time of day, it was nearly deserted, the sidewalks empty, the streetlights flickering weakly. My eyes darted around frantically, searching for anywhere I could go. There, a diner with a neon sign that buzzed faintly, a few cars parked outside, their chrome glinting in the late afternoon light. I yanked the wheel, pulling into the diner's gravel lot, not bothering to park properly, just slamming on the brakes and jumping out of the car, my legs shaky as I ran for the door. The bell above the door jingled as I burst in, startling the few patrons inside. An elderly couple sharing a slice of pie, a trucker hunched over a coffee mug. An older waitress looked up from where she was wiping down the counter, her gray hair pulled into a neat bun, concern etching her features as she took in my panicked state. my chest heaving, my face flushed. "Honey, are you all right?" she asked, already moving toward me, her voice warm but laced with worry as she set down her rag. "Please," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath, my words tumbling out in a rush. "There's someone following me. He's been following me for hours. I think he's right outside." My voice cracked, the fear spilling over as I glanced back at the door, expecting to see that dark figure any second. The waitress's eyes widened, and she quickly ushered me behind the counter, her hand firm on my arm. "Come on back here, sweetie. We'll call the police." As she led me toward the phone mounted on the wall, I heard the bell jingle again, sharp and jarring. My blood ran cold as I turned to see the man from the SUV standing in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. Up close, he was even more intimidating, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and arms corded with muscle, his black jacket taut across his chest. He still wore the sunglasses, hiding his eyes, but I could feel his gaze boring into me, heavy and unyielding. "Sir," the waitress said, her voice stern despite the slight tremor I could hear, stepping in front of me like a shield. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The man didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe, his presence like a storm cloud in the small diner. Then slowly, he reached up and removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes so pale they were almost colorless, filled with an intensity that made my skin crawl, like he could see straight through me. "I'm afraid I can't do that," he said, his voice low and gravelly, each word deliberate. "You see, this young lady and I have some unfinished business." I shook my head, my throat tight with fear, my hands trembling at my sides. "I don't know you," I said, hating how my voice shook. "I've never seen you before today. Why are you following me?" He smiled then, cold, humorless thing that didn't reach his eyes, his lips curling just enough to show teeth. "Oh, but I know you, Sarah," he said, my name sounding like a curse in his mouth. "I know all about you. About the accident. About what you did." My breath caught in my throat, the world tilting around me. The accident. He couldn't possibly know about that. No one knew. I'd made sure of it, buried it deep, locked it away in a corner of my mind where even I rarely dared to look. 2 years ago, a rainy night, a deserted road, a man stepping out of nowhere, the sickening thud against my car. I panicked, driven away, told myself there were no witnesses, no evidence, that I could forget it if I tried hard enough. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, trying to keep it steady, to hold on to the lie I'd lived with for so long. "Don't play dumb," he snarled, taking a step forward, his boots heavy on the linoleum floor. The other patrons were watching now, the elderly couple frozen with their forks halfway to their mouths, the trucker's hand tightening around his mug, a mixture of fear and confusion on their faces. "You left him there to die. My brother. You hit him with your car and just drove away." The room seemed to spin, the air too thick to breathe. How did he know? I'd been so careful, checking the news for days after, finding no reports, no mention of a hit and run. I convinced myself it was a bad dream, something I could erase if I never spoke of it. "I'm calling the police," the waitress said, reaching for the phone behind the counter, her movements quick and decisive. "Go ahead," the man said, not taking his eyes off me, his pale gaze unblinking. "By the time they get here, we'll be long gone, won't we, Sarah?" I saw his hand move toward his jacket, a slow, deliberate motion, and my heart nearly stopped. Did he have a weapon? A gun? A knife? I couldn't take that chance. I ran, pushing past the waitress, ignoring her startled cry as I shoved through the swinging door into the kitchen, the smell of grease and coffee replaced by the sharp tang of fear. I burst through the back door into the alley behind the diner, the gravel crunching under my sneakers as I sprinted, my lungs burning. I could hear heavy footsteps behind me, the man giving chase, his boots pounding against the ground. The alley opened onto another street, lined with shuttered shops and empty lots. I ran blindly, not knowing where I was going, just knowing I had to get away, my legs aching, my breath ragged. I ducked down another alley, hoping to lose him in the maze of back streets, the walls closing in around me, graffiti covered and damp with the day's earlier rain. But as I turned a corner, I found myself facing a dead end, a high chain-link fence, topped with barbed wire, blocking my path too tall to climb, its links rattling as I pushed against it in desperation. I spun around, ready to backtrack, but it was too late. He stood at the entrance to the alley, blocking my only escape route, his silhouette dark against the fading light, his sunglasses back on, hiding those unnerving eyes. "Nowhere left to run," he said, advancing slowly, his voice calm but laced with menace, each step deliberate, like a predator closing in. I pressed my back against the fence, the cold metal biting through my jacket, my mind racing. This couldn't be how it ended, trapped in a dirty alley, alone and defenseless. Just as he reached for me, his hand outstretched, a siren pierced the air, sharp and sudden, red and blue lights flashing at the end of the alley. "Police," a voice shouted. "Don't move." The man froze, his hand hovering inches from me, then slowly raised both hands, his jaw tightening as officers swarmed in, their guns drawn, cuffs glinting in the light. I sank to the ground, the gravel rough against my palms, the adrenaline draining out of me, leaving me shaky and hollow. It came out later, in the cold, fluorescent-lit police station, that the man was indeed the brother of someone I'd hit with my car 2 years ago. A hit and run I'd tried desperately to forget, the guilt, the constant weight I'd carried in silence. He'd spent those 2 years tracking me down, piecing together my life, waiting for the right moment to exact his revenge, following me across states until he found me on that highway. I faced consequences for my actions that day, charges, a trial, the truth laid bare. But as I sat in the police station giving my statement, my hands still trembling, I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of relief. The guilt I'd carried for 2 years was finally out in the open, no longer a secret eating away at me. The open road doesn't hold the same appeal for me anymore. The freedom I once felt now tainted by the memory of that black SUV in my mirror. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, I still check my rearview mirror a little more often than necessary, half expecting to see those tinted windows, those pale eyes staring back. The highway stretches out endless and empty, but I know now that it's never truly safe, that the past can follow you, as relentless as a shadow you can't outrun. The steady drip of water echoing through the empty corridors was the first sign that we weren't alone. I froze, my camera halfway to my face, the strap digging into my neck, and locked eyes with Jake, his expression mirroring the chill that raced down my spine. In an abandoned hospital scheduled for demolition, there shouldn't be running water. There shouldn't be anything at all, just dust, decay, and silence. But the sound was unmistakable, a rhythmic plink, plink, plink that seemed to mock the stillness of St. Mary's Hospital, a crumbling relic we'd snuck into for a thrill. We'd slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence surrounding the property just after sunset, the sky streaked with orange and purple as the light faded. The hospital loomed before us, its boarded-up windows like blind eyes, its concrete walls scarred with graffiti, tags and curses scrawled in neon spray paint. For urban explorers like us, St. Mary's was a gold mine, a labyrinth of eerie rooms and forgotten relics perfect for haunting photos and spine-tingling stories. We'd hatched the plan over beers the previous week, laughing about the creepy vibes and the Instagram-worthy shots we'd get. Now, standing in the musty darkness of what used to be the emergency room, the air thick with the smell of mold and peeling paint, I wasn't so sure. Something about this place felt different, wrong. Like the building itself was watching us, its shadows too deep, its silence too heavy. Jake adjusted his backpack, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, catching dust motes swirling in the air. "Maybe it's just a leaky pipe," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction, his usual cocky grin replaced by a tight-lipped frown. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, my throat dry. We'd been in abandoned buildings before, warehouses, old schools, even a derelict factory, but none had felt like this, like the air was pressing against us, urging us to leave. Still, we pressed on, our footsteps echoing off the cracked linoleum floors, the sound unnaturally loud in the cavernous space. I tried to focus on getting good shots, an overturned gurney tipped against a wall, its wheels rusted, a shattered medicine cabinet, its glass doors jagged like teeth, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, eyes hidden in the darkness just beyond our flashlight beams. As we turned a corner into what must have been a patient ward, the hallway stretching into shadow, Jake suddenly grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my sleeve. "Did you hear that?" he hissed, his eyes wide, the beam of his flashlight trembling slightly. I strained my ears, hearing nothing but our own breathing and the distant drip of water, each drop a tiny hammer against my nerves. Then faintly I caught it, a soft beeping sound, rhythmic and electronic, like a heart monitor in a hospital drama. My stomach twisted. "That's impossible," I muttered, my voice barely audible, but we both knew what we'd heard. The sounds out of place as a scream in a library. Drawn by a morbid curiosity, we followed the sound, our flashlights sweeping the walls, revealing peeling paint and water-stained ceiling tiles sagging like wet cardboard. The beeping grew louder with each step, a steady pulse that seemed to mock the deadness of our surroundings, leading us deeper into the hospital. We passed rooms filled with broken furniture, hospital beds with torn mattresses, for stands tipped over like fallen soldiers, and walls marked with more graffiti, some of it fresh, the paint still glistening. The air grew colder, heavier, the musty smell giving way to something sharper, almost metallic. We reached a set of double doors, their faded sign reading radiology in chipped letters, the beeping now clear and insistent, coming from inside. Jake reached for the handle, his hand steady despite the tension in his shoulders, but I grabbed his wrist, my fingers cold against his skin. "Maybe we shouldn't," I said, surprising myself with how shaky my voice sounded, the words spilling out before I could stop them. My heart was pounding, a warning drumbeat that urged me to turn back. Jake hesitated, his eyes searching mine, then shook his head, a flicker of his usual bravado returning. "We came here for a thrill, right?" he said, his voice low but firm. "Let's see this through." Before I could protest further, he pushed the doors open, the hinges groaning as they swung inward. The room beyond was pitch black, our flashlights barely penetrating the gloom, their beams swallowed by the darkness. The beeping was unmistakable now, coming from the center of the room, a steady electronic pulse that set my teeth on edge. As we stepped inside, motion-activated lights flickered to life, their fluorescent hum buzzing overhead, momentarily blinding us with their harsh glare. When my eyes adjusted, I almost wished they hadn't. The room was filled with active medical equipment, heart monitors with glowing screens, ventilators hissing rhythmically, for stands with bags of clear fluid dangling from their hooks. All of them were running, lights blinking, displays showing numbers and graphs that pulsed in time with a beeping. My breath caught in my throat, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. "This isn't possible," Jake breathed, his voice barely above a whisper, his flashlight forgotten in his hand as he stared at the impossible scene. "The power's been off for years. The hospital had been abandoned since the early 2000s, its utilities cut long before we were born. Yet here was this room, alive with the hum of machinery, as if it had never stopped functioning." I raised my camera with trembling hands, desperate to document what we were seeing, the lens shaking as I framed the shot. But as I looked through the viewfinder, my heart stopped. In the center of the room, partially hidden by a tattered privacy curtain, was a hospital bed, and it wasn't empty. I must have made a sound, a choked gasp, because Jake turned to look at me, then followed my gaze, his face draining of color. Is someone there?" he whispered, swallowing hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak, my camera lowering as my hand shook too much to hold it steady. There was only one way to find out. We approached the bed slowly, our footsteps unnaturally loud against the linoleum, the beeping growing louder, more insistent, like a heartbeat racing toward climax. With each step, I prayed it was a trick of the light, a pile of old blankets that looked like a body in the gloom, a mannequin left behind by some prankster. But as we reached the bedside and Jake pulled back the curtain, its rings rattling along the rod, those hopes were shattered. There, lying perfectly still, was a patient, an old man, his skin waxy and pale, almost translucent, like parchment stretched over bone. Tubes ran from his arms to the surrounding machines, clear fluid dripping steadily into his veins. His chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, in time with the ventilator's hiss, each breath a forced imitation of life. His eyes were closed, his face serene, but there was something wrong about him, something that made my skin crawl, a stillness that went beyond sleep, a presence that felt more like an absence. "This can't be real," I muttered, raising my camera again, needing to capture this to prove it wasn't a hallucination. But when I pressed the shutter, the screen remained black, the battery icon flashing empty despite being fully charged when we arrived. Jake was backing away, shaking his head, his flashlight beam jittering across the walls. "We need to get out of here now," he said, his voice cracking, his usual confidence gone. I couldn't have agreed more, my legs already moving toward the door. But as we turned to leave, we found our exit blocked. A nurse stood in the doorway, her crisp white uniform a stark contrast to the decay around us, her cap perched perfectly on her head, like something out of a 1950s medical drama. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, which were dark and empty, like twin voids in her pale face. "And where do you think you're going?" she asked, her voice echoing strangely in a room, too loud, too clear, as if it came from everywhere at once. "Visiting hours aren't over yet." Jake let out a strangled laugh, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Look, we're sorry. We shouldn't be here. We'll just go, okay?" His voice was high, desperate, but the nurse's smile widened, revealing too many teeth, sharp and gleaming in the fluorescent light. "Oh, I'm afraid that's not possible," she said, her tone almost cheerful, but laced with something sinister. "You see, we've been waiting for new arrivals for so long." As she spoke, more figures appear behind her. Doctors in white coats, nurses with clipboards, patients in tattered hospital gowns, all with that same too wide smile and empty eyes, their movements jerky, like puppets on strings. Panic surged through me, hot and electric. I grabbed Jake's arm, yanking him toward the other exit, a fire door at the far end of the room. "Run!" I shouted, my voice raw as we sprinted through the hospital corridors. The sound of pursuit close behind, footsteps, too many to count, echoing in the dark, accompanied by whispers and laughter that weren't human. Left, right, up a flight of stairs, we ran blindly, our flashlights bouncing, the hospital a maze of identical hallways and locked doors. I lost all sense of direction, my lungs burning, my legs screaming, but stopping wasn't an option. We burst through a door and found ourselves on the roof, the night air cool and sharp against my face, the city skyline a distant glow beyond the hospital's crumbling edges. The relief was fleeting. We were trapped, the low wall at the roof's edge our only barrier against a 5-story drop. Jake ran to the edge, looking down, his flashlight beam disappearing into the darkness below. "It's too high," he panted, his voice breaking. "We can't jump." The door behind us crashed open, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet night. The nurse stood there, flanked by her grotesque entourage, their smiles now manic grins, their eyes glinting with hunger. Now, she cooed, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "There's no need to run. We have beds waiting for both of you." They advanced, their movements synchronized, unnatural, the doctor's stethoscope swinging, the patient's gowns fluttering like ghosts. Jake and I backed up, our shoulders brushing the low wall, the empty air behind us a cold promise. I could hear the distant sound of traffic below, the normalcy of it maddeningly out of reach. "We have to jump," I said, my voice barely a whisper, my eyes locked on the approaching figures. Jake looked at me like I was insane, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "We'll die," he said, his voice hoarse, but his eyes flicked to the nurse, her smile widening as she closed the distance. I glanced back at the advancing figures, their hands reaching out, fingers long and claw-like in the moonlight. "If we stay, we'll wish we had," I said, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. Understanding dawned in Jake's eyes, his jaw tightening as he nodded, gripping my hand tightly, his palm slick with sweat. "On 3, I said, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at me. 1, 2, we never made it to 3. A hand grabbed the back of my jacket, yanking me backward with impossible strength. I heard Jake yell, felt his hand slip from mine, his fingers clawing at the air. Then I was falling, tumbling through the darkness, the wind rushing past me, the ground rushing up to meet me. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for impact, my mind screaming that this was the end. But the impact never came. I jolted awake with a gasp, my heart pounding, my body tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom window, the familiar hum of the city waking up outside. Cars honking, a neighbor's lawnmower buzzing. I was in my bed, safe, the hospital gone, the nurse and her entourage nowhere in sight. It had all been a dream, a vivid, terrifying nightmare that felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, needing to hear Jake's voice, to confirm he was okay, that we hadn't actually been chased through that haunted hospital. As I unlocked the screen, my blood drained from my face, a cold wave of dread washing over me. There, in my camera roll, was a single photo, timestamp from last night. It showed a hospital room filled with active medical equipment. Heart monitors, ventilators for stands, their lights blinking in the dark. In the center was a bed, and lying in it was a pale, still figure, tubes snaking from his arms, his chest rising and falling with the ventilator's rhythm. The old man from my dream. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Then it buzzed, a text from an unknown number, the words glowing on the screen. Visiting hours aren't over yet. We're waiting for you to come back. I dropped the phone, the clatter loud in the quiet room, my mind reeling. It couldn't be real, had to be some kind of sick joke a prank Jake was pulling to mess with me. But as I sat there, trying to make sense of it all, I noticed something on my nightstand that hadn't been there when I went to bed. A small white object, its edges crisp against the wood. With trembling fingers, I picked it up, my heart sinking as I read the text printed on it. It was a hospital wristband, the kind they put on patients when they're admitted, and it had my name on it, the letters stark and undeniable. The last subway train of the night is never a pleasant ride, but I never imagined it would spiral into a nightmare. As the doors hissed shut behind me, sealing me inside the dimly lit car with a stranger whose gaze never wavered from my face, a cold realization hit. I might not make it home alive. It had been one of those brutal days at the office, the kind where every possible thing goes wrong. Deadlines missed, servers crashing, my inbox flooded with complaints. It was chaos. I'd stayed hours later than planned, hunched over my laptop, trying to salvage what I could, my eyes burning from the screen's glare. By the time I finally powered down, packed my bag, and stepped out into the night, the city was eerily quiet. The usual hum of traffic and chatter was gone, replaced by a stillness that made my footsteps sound too loud on the pavement. I pulled my coat tighter against the late autumn chill, my breath visible in the crisp air, and hurried toward the subway station, my heels clicking against the sidewalk, the sound echoing off shuttered storefronts. Descending the stairs to the platform, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, casting harsh shadows on the grimy, cracked tiles. The station was deserted, a cavernous void that swallowed the sound of my steps. I glanced at my watch, 11:58 p.m. The last train was due in 2 minutes. As I waited, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, a prickle ran down the back of my neck, that unmistakable feeling of being watched. I spun around, scanning the empty platform, my eyes darting to the shadowed corners, the graffiti-covered pillars, the locked ticket booth. Nothing. No one. Yet the unease lingered, a weight in my chest that refused to lift. I shoved my hands into my pockets, my fingers brushing against my keys, their familiar jangle a small comfort. The distant rumble of the approaching train broke the silence, a welcome relief. It screeched to a stop, brakes grinding, and the doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss. I stepped inside, instinctively moving toward the middle of the car, my bag slung over my shoulder. That's when I saw him, the only other passenger, seated at the far end of the car. He wore a dark overcoat, its collar turned up, and a fedora pulled low, obscuring most of his face. As I settled into a seat, gripping the cold metal pole for balance, his head tilted up slightly. His eyes caught the dim light, cold, calculating, locked directly on me. A chill slithered through me, sharp and unsettling. I tried to shake it off, telling myself he was just another tired commuter, probably as eager to get home as I was. Maybe he was staring because I'd rushed in, looking frazzled, my hair escaping its bun, my coat slightly askew from the hurry. I pulled out my phone, more to occupy my hands than for any real purpose. No signal, of course. There never was this deep underground, the concrete and steel blocking out the world above. The train lurched forward, the familiar sway of the car almost soothing, but not quite. I could still feel those eyes boring into me, a weight that made my skin prickle. I risked a glance up, keeping my head tilted down, peering through my lashes. He hadn't moved, his posture rigid, his gaze unwavering, fixed on me with an intensity that felt unnatural, predatory. My stomach twisted. This wasn't normal commuter behavior. No one stares like that, not at a stranger on a late-night train. I shifted in my seat, crossing my arms, trying to make myself smaller, less noticeable, but his eyes followed me, unblinking. I looked up at the subway map above the doors, counting the stops to my station. 7. 7 stops with this man and his relentless stare. I could handle it, I told myself. Just keep calm, keep your head down. It'll be fine. The train slowed as we approached the first stop, the brakes squealing as the doors slid open. I held my breath, hoping someone else would get on. A worker finishing a late shift, a group of friends stumbling home from a bar, anyone to break this suffocating tension. But the platform was empty, the doors closing with a thud that echoed in the quiet car. As we pulled away, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The man had moved. He was now just a few seats closer, his dark coat blending into the shadows of the car. How had he done that so silently? I hadn't heard a sound, no rustle of fabric, no creak of the seat, nothing. My heart began to race, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the hum of the train. I clutched my bag tighter, my eyes darting to the emergency call button near the doors, its red light glowing faintly. Would anyone even respond this late? Another stop came and went, the platform as deserted as the last, and when I dared to look back, he'd moved again. Now he was just one seat away, close enough that I could smell the faint, sharp scent of his cologne, something heavy and old-fashioned. I stood abruptly, my legs unsteady, and moved to stand near the doors, gripping the pole so tightly my knuckles whitened. I tried to look confident, alert, remembering something from a self-defense class years ago. Predators target the weak, so stand tall, look like you can fight back. But my legs were shaking, my breath shallow, and I wasn't sure I could fool anyone, least of all him. As the train pulled away from the third stop, I heard it, a soft scuff of shoes on the floor, deliberate and close. He was standing now, right behind me, his presence a looming weight at my back. Lovely night for a ride, isn't it? His voice was soft, almost gentle, but it sent shivers racing down my spine, cold and sharp like ice. I didn't respond, didn't turn around, my eyes fixed on the scratched plexiglass of the door, reflecting the dim interior of the car. Maybe if I ignored him, he'd back off, lose interest. It was a desperate hope, childish even, but it was all I had. It's rude not to answer when someone speaks to you, he said, his tone hardening, a dangerous edge creeping in, like a blade sliding from its sheath. My mouth went dry, my throat tightening as I swallowed hard. Please, I managed to croak, my voice barely audible, trembling despite my effort to sound steady. I don't want any trouble. He chuckled, a low, mirthless sound that echoed in the empty car, chilling me to the bone. Trouble? Oh, my dear, trouble found you the moment you stepped onto this train. My mind raced, fragments of that long-ago self-defense class flashing through my panic. Go for the eyes, the groin, the knees, vulnerable spots, easy to hit. But could I do it? Could I actually fight this man, whose presence felt like a physical weight pressing against me? We were approaching another stop, the train slowing, the platform coming into view through the window. I prayed for someone aboard, anyone, a janitor, a drunk, a group of rowdy kids, anyone to shatter this nightmare. But the platform was empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing over bare tiles, and as the doors began to close, I made a split-second decision. I bolted. I don't know what possessed me, where I thought I was going, but blind panic took over, propelling me forward. I squeezed through the doors just as they were shutting, the metal grazing my arm, a sharp sting that barely registered. Behind me, I heard a curse low and venomous as the man realized what I'd done. I ran down the platform, my footsteps echoing loudly in the deserted station, the sound bouncing off the walls like a drumbeat. I reached the stairs and took them two at a time, my lungs burning, my bag bouncing against my hip. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps heavy, fast, gaining ground with every stride, his breath a ragged counterpoint to my own. I burst onto the street, the cool night air hitting me like a slap, shocking my senses. The city was a ghost town. No cars, no pedestrians, just empty sidewalks stretching under flickering streetlights, the dark windows of closed shops staring back like unseeing eyes. I ran, not knowing where I was headed, just needing to put distance between myself and the man chasing me. My sneakers pounded the pavement, my coat flapping behind me, the cold air searing my throat. I could hear him closer now, his heavy breathing filling my ears, a relentless rhythm that drove my panic higher. I turned a corner, hoping to lose him in the maze of side streets, and found myself in an alley, its narrow walls closing in around me. My heart sank as I realized my mistake. A chain-link fence blocked the far end, a dead end, its metal glinting faintly in the moonlight. I spun around, ready to backtrack, but it was too late. He stood at the alley's entrance, his silhouette filling the space, blocking my only escape. Now, he said, his voice eerily calm, a stark contrast to the pounding of my heart. That wasn't very nice, running away like that. Didn't your mother teach you better manners? He stepped closer, his boots scuffing against the gritty pavement, and for the first time, I got a clear look at his face. He was older than I'd expected, his skin etched with deep lines around his mouth and eyes, his hair graying beneath the brim of his hat. But those eyes, they were sharp, alert, filled with a hunger that made my skin crawl. Like he was seeing something in me I couldn't hide. Please, I begged, my back pressed against the cold brick wall, the rough surface biting through my coat. I have money. Take it, take anything you want, just let me go. My voice cracked, desperation spilling out, my hands fumbling for my bag as if I could barter my way out of this. He laughed, the sound bouncing off the alley walls, harsh and hollow. Oh, my dear, what makes you think I want your money? He reached into his coat, and I braced myself, expecting the glint of a knife, the cold barrel of a gun. Instead, he pulled out a badge, its metal catching the faint light, the words detective embossed in stark letters. Detective John Marlowe, he said, his voice taking on an official tone, clipped and authoritative. You're under arrest. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the words, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. W.H. what? I stammered, the world tilting around me, the alley's walls seeming to close in tighter. Sarah Jenkins, he said, my name on his lips like a physical blow, making me flinch. You're wanted for questioning in connection with the disappearance of your roommate, Lisa Chen. The ground seemed to drop out from under me, my legs trembling as the name hit me like a punch. Lisa, my roommate, my best friend, the girl who'd vanished 3 months ago, leaving behind a gaping hole in my life and a mystery that haunted my every waking moment. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, my hands pressed against the wall to keep myself upright. I've already talked to the police. I told him everything I know. Detective Marlowe's eyes hardened, his gaze piercing, like he could see straight through my words. Did you, he asked, his voice low, accusing. Did you tell them about the fight you had with Lisa the night she disappeared? Did you tell them about the threatening text you sent her? Did you tell them about the blood we found in your car? My legs gave out, and I slid down the wall, the rough bricks scraping my back as I sank to the ground, cold pavement seeping through my jeans. This couldn't be happening. How did he know about the fight? It was nothing, just a stupid argument over dishes, over borrowing my clothes without asking, petty roommate stuff that blew over by morning. And those texts, I deleted them, erased every trace of my frustration, the angry words I'd typed in a moment of anger and instantly regretted. The blood in my car, that was from when I'd cut my hand helping Lisa move that heavy dresser, the gash deep enough to need stitches, the stain lingering despite my efforts to clean it. Wasn't it? My mind reeled, memories blurring at the edges, doubt creeping in like a poison. As Detective Marlowe read me my rights, his voice a monotone drone, he snapped handcuffs around my wrists, the metal cold and tight against my skin. My thoughts spiraled, grasping at fragments of the past 3 months. Had I done something I couldn't remember? The stress of Lisa's disappearance had been crushing. Sleepless nights, endless police interviews, the guilt of not knowing where she was, if she was okay. Could there be gaps in my memory, moments I'd blocked out? No, it wasn't possible. I loved Lisa. I never hurt her. This was a mistake, a terrible misunderstanding. But as Marlowe's words echoed in my ears, you have the right to remain silent. I couldn't shake the fear that I'd missed something, that the truth was slipping through my fingers like sand. He led me out of the alley, his hand firm on my arm, guiding me toward a waiting police car parked at the curb, its lights off, silent in the dead of night. The city streets blurred past as we drove, the familiar skyline now alien, menacing, the buildings looming like silent witnesses to my unraveling life. I stared out the window, my reflection pale and hollow-eyed in the glass, my mind racing. Lisa's disappearance had consumed me, her absence a constant ache, but I'd never imagined it would lead to this, to handcuffs, to accusations, to a detective chasing me through the night. Somewhere out there was the truth about what had happened to her, A truth I'd been searching for in every unanswered phone call, every sleepless night. I had to find it, for Lisa, for myself, for the life I was now fighting to reclaim. As the police car pulled into the station, its tires crunching against the gravel lot, I realized the last subway ride of the night hadn't just been a terrifying encounter with a stranger. It was the beginning of something much bigger, the first thread in a mystery I'd never wanted to unravel, but now had no choice but to face. The truth was out there, hidden in the shadows of that night 3 months ago, and I had to uncover it. Because if I didn't, I might never see the outside of a prison cell again. The nightmare that began with a simple subway ride was now the first chapter of a story I had to finish, no matter how dark the pages ahead might be. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came when our pilot started shouting at nothing but air. One moment, we were gliding smoothly at 30,000 feet, the hum of the small private plane a steady backdrop to the quiet chatter of its 8 passengers. The next, his voice crackled over the intercom, sharp and agitated, slicing through the calm. "No, that's not right. I won't do it. Get out of my cockpit." A murmur of unease rippled through the cabin, heads turning, eyes meeting in silent alarm. I glanced at the elderly woman beside me, her arthritic hands gripping the armrests, knuckles white, her face etched with fear. "It's probably just technical difficulties," I said, trying to sound reassuring, but my voice trembled, betraying the anxiety tightening my chest. The flight had begun like any other, a routine hop from Chicago to Detroit, a trip I'd made dozens of times for business, always so uneventful it bordered on dull. Our small plane, a twin-engine prop with faded leather seats and a faint smell of aviation fuel, carried just 8 passengers plus the pilot, a grizzled man with a clipped voice who'd given us a perfunctory safety briefing before takeoff. I'd settled into my window seat, the familiar skyline of Chicago shrinking below as we climbed, the clouds parting to reveal a patchwork of fields and highways. The elderly woman next to me, her gray hair pinned neatly in a bun, had offered a shy smile before pulling out a knitting magazine, her fingers tracing the glossy pages. Across the aisle, a young couple whispered excitedly about their weekend plans, while a middle-aged man in a rumpled suit tapped away on his laptop, oblivious to the world. It was all so ordinary, until it wasn't. Without warning, the plane lurched sharply to the right, a violent jolt that sent gasps and a few screams echoing through the cabin. My stomach dropped, like I just crested the peak of a roller coaster, my hands instinctively clutching the armrests. The fasten seatbelt sign pinged on, its manic dings punctuating the chaos, the light flashing red above our heads. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot's voice came again, strained and breathless. "We're experiencing some turbulence. Please remain in your seats." Turbulence? This was no mere air pocket. The plane continued to bank, the wing outside my window dipping so low I could see the horizon tilting at a sickening angle. We were losing altitude fast, the clouds rushing past in a blur, the engine's whine growing higher, more desperate. The cabin erupted in panic. The young woman across the aisle began to sob, her partner pulling her close, his face pale. The man in the suit snapped his laptop shut, stood up, and stumbled toward the cockpit, his tie flapping against his chest. "I'm going to see what's going on," he announced, his voice loud but shaky, his jaw set with determination. Before anyone could stop him, he wrenched open the cockpit door, the hinges squeaking in protest. In the brief moment before he slammed it shut behind him, I caught a glimpse that would haunt me for years. The pilot was alone, grappling with the controls, his face twisted in a mix of fear and rage, sweat beading on his forehead. But the worst part wasn't his expression. It was that he was shouting, gesturing wildly at the empty co-pilot seat beside him, as if arguing with someone who wasn't there. A cold realization hit me, heavy and suffocating. Our pilot was hallucinating, or worse. The cabin descended into chaos, voices overlapping in a cacophony of fear. The sobbing woman's cries grew hysterical, her partner's attempts to soothe her drowned out by an older man in the back row, his voice booming as he demanded answers, his fists pounding the seat in front of him. I stayed frozen, my mind racing through possibilities. Drugs, a mental breakdown, a medical emergency. None of them good. My hands gripped the armrests, my nails digging into the worn leather, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The elderly woman beside me reached out, her hand trembling as it touched mine, her skin cool and papery. We exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement to the terror binding us. Minutes dragged on, each one an eternity, the plane's erratic course making my stomach churn. It would level out briefly, offering a fleeting hope, only to plunge again, my ears popping painfully with the rapid changes in altitude. The overhead bins rattled, a loose water bottle rolling down the aisle, the sound unnervingly mundane amidst the chaos. Finally, the cockpit door swung open, and the man in the suit emerged, his face ashen, his tie now askew. He cleared his throat, trying to project a calm he clearly didn't feel, his hands raised to quiet the cabin. "Folks, we have a situation," he began, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engines and the panicked murmurs. "Our pilot, he's not well. He claims there's someone else in the cockpit with him, trying to take control of the plane." A fresh wave of terror swept through the cabin, the sobbing woman's cries reaching a fever pitch, her partner's arms tightening around her. "But there's no one else there," the man continued, his voice cracking. "I've offered to help, but he's paranoid, won't let anyone near the controls. Says we're all in on it, whatever it is." My mind whirled, trying to process this. A psychotic break? Drug-induced hallucinations? Whatever the cause, we were at the mercy of a man who'd lost his grip on reality, hurtling through the sky in a metal tube with no one else to fly it. "What are we going to do?" The older man shouted, his face red, veins bulging in his neck. The man in the suit ran a shaky hand through his thinning hair, his eyes darting nervously. "I've managed to radio for help," he said, swallowing hard. "Air traffic control knows our situation. They're clearing a path for us to make an emergency landing at the nearest airport." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the cabin. It was fleeting. I couldn't shake the dread pooling in my stomach, heavy and cold. An emergency landing sounded promising, but we still had to get down safely with a delusional pilot at the controls. The elderly woman's hand tightened on mine, her fingers frail but firm, and I squeezed back, both of us drawing comfort from the simple human connection. The next 30 minutes were the longest of my life. The plane bounced and swayed through the sky, each movement sending jolts of dread through my system. My body braced for the worst. The cabin was a mix of stifled sobs, whispered prayers, and tense silence, the passengers united in our shared fear. I tried to distract myself by looking out the window, but the view only amplified my terror. The ground was rushing up too fast, fields and roads growing larger with alarming speed, the horizon a blur of green and gray. The young couple clung to each other, their faces buried in each other's shoulders, while the older man muttered under his breath, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Suddenly, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom again, high-pitched and frantic, each word dripping with panic. "He's trying to crash us. I won't let him, I won't." The plane took a sharp nosedive, the angle so steep I felt the seatbelt cut into my hips. My body pressed forward against it. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, swaying wildly with the plane's descent, their yellow cups dangling like grim pendulums. I fumbled with mine, my hand shaking so badly I could barely secure it over my face, the plastic cold against my skin. We were plummeting, the roar of the engines deafening, punctuated by the terrified screams of my fellow passengers. I squeezed my eyes shut, certain these were my final moments, my mind flashing to my family, to the things I'd left unsaid, the life I wasn't ready to lose. Then, just as suddenly, the dive leveled out, the G-forces slamming me back into my seat, my stomach lurching with the abrupt change. I opened my eyes, my breath ragged through the mask, and saw we were skimming just above a long stretch of highway, cars below swerving to avoid us, their headlights flashing in the twilight. With a bone-jarring thud, we hit the ground, the landing gear screeching against the asphalt, a high-pitched wail that set my teeth on edge. The plane bounced once, twice, the wingtips grazing the pavement with sparks flying, the cabin shuddering with each impact. The pilot fought to bring us to a stop, the brakes grinding, the plane fishtailing slightly before finally, mercifully, coming to rest. For a moment, there was absolute silence, the kind that presses against your eardrums, heavy and surreal. Then, as if a spell had broken, chaos erupted. People were crying, laughing hysterically, hugging strangers in a frenzy of relief. I sat motionless, my body still braced for impact, my mind struggling to accept that we'd survived. The man in the suit wrenched open the emergency exit. the door clanging against the fuselage, and a rush of cool evening air flooded the cabin, sharp with the smell of asphalt and exhaust. We spilled out onto the highway, our legs unsteady, our faces pale in the fading light. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing closer, red and blue lights flashing through the dusk. I turned to look back at the plane, its metal skin glinting faintly under the highway's sodium lights. The pilot was being led out by two passengers, his wrists held firmly, his eyes wild and unfocused, still muttering about the phantom co-pilot, his voice hoarse and disjointed. He was there, I swear, he was trying to take the controls. His words trailed off as they guided him toward the grassy median, his head bowed, his uniform disheveled. In the harsh light of day, standing on solid ground, it all seemed like a surreal nightmare, but the terror had been all too real, etched into every scream, every jolt of the plane. As we waited for the authorities, the highway a bizarre runway littered with skid marks. I stood with the elderly woman, her hand still in mine, her knitting magazine clutched to her chest like a talisman. Paramedics arrived, their radios crackling, checking us for injuries, wrapping blankets around our shoulders, the scratchy wool a small comfort. Police took statements, their notebooks filling with our shaky accounts, their faces a mix of sympathy and disbelief. I couldn't stop replaying the events in my mind, the pilot's frantic voice, the sickening lurch of freefall, the miraculous landing on this stretch of asphalt. Cars now stopped in both directions, drivers gawking from their windows. Later, we'd learn the truth. Our pilot had suffered a psychotic episode, triggered by a lethal mix of sleep deprivation and undiagnosed schizophrenia, a condition he'd hidden from the airline. The company would face scrutiny, lawsuits piling up as investigators questioned their screening processes, headlines splashing the story across every news outlet. But in that moment, standing on the highway, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles bathing the scene in a surreal glow, all I felt was an overwhelming gratitude. Grateful to be alive, to feel the solid pavement beneath my feet, to have another chance to call my family, to hold them close. As I gave my statement to a patient police officer, his pen scratching across his notepad, I found myself glancing up at the sky. It was a beautiful evening, the kind of clear, endless blue that usually filled me with wonder, a promise of open horizons. Now, it held a new kind of terror, a reminder of how quickly safety could shatter. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I'd never board a plane the same way again. The next time, if there was a next time, I'd carry the weight of this day, the knowledge of how thin the line was between routine and catastrophe. As the last of the passengers were loaded into ambulances for further checks, the highway slowly reopening to traffic, I took one final look at the plane. It sat there, a grounded metal bird, its propellers still, its cabin now empty. It was a stark reminder of human frailty, of how a single mind could unravel and nearly take us all with it. But it was also a testament to resilience, to the miracle of our survival against impossible odds. I turned away, ready to go home, to feel the earth beneath my feet, to embrace the life I'd almost lost. The sky could wait. For now, I was content to be earthbound, forever changed by a flight that had carried me to the edge of disaster and back.